expand. As soon as Meng Hao sensed the world essence, he began to absorb it. The world essence around him began to move, and then became visible for all to see. Countless motes of light, emanating soft glows, floated out from the first heaven and spread out to fill the entire area. From a distance, it was possible to see 100,000 of them, forming together into the shape of a lizard. As for Meng Hao, he was located where that lizard's heart would be, where the world essence was most dense. At this point the outsider Tao sovereign gasped, then cried out, "World essence." The outsider paragon fighting Sea Dream saw the lizard-shaped world essence, and his eyes filled with grief. Not all worlds could give birth to world essence. However, if one did, if that resulting world essence was given enough time, it could actually become a real living being. All of the cultivators and outsiders could see what was happening, although not everyone understood it. Of course, thanks to the events which had occurred in the windswept realm, the echelon cultivators from the various mountains and seas knew exactly what they were looking at, and their jaws dropped. It only took an instant for them to realize that this was world essence. Meng Hao's heart was pounding. Based on the level of his current cultivation base, being able to sense this world essence filled him with an intense desire to acquire it. Furthermore, he knew that world essence was extremely precious, especially to him. He was currently in the very middle of all of the world essence, and every breath he took caused vast amounts of it to flow into him. His thinking grew quicker, his powers of deduction stronger, and even his willpower seemed to increase. It was as if he were becoming more at one with heaven and earth. It was at this same point that the outsider Tao sovereign, eyes red, life force burning, suddenly had a strange feeling. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion or not, but after seeing Meng Hao begin to absorb the world essence, he almost thought he could hear the world essence screaming. This was the essence of his home, the homeland of his heart, the mother of lizards. "Meng Hao," he roared. He flickered into motion, shooting into the world essence in an attempt to stop Meng Hao. However, as he closed in, Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he dodged to the side, clearly not interested in tangling with the outsider Tao sovereign. Instead, he went all out to continue to absorb the world essence. When he couldn't dodge to the side, he used the lightning cauldron and formed displacement transposition to put distance between the two of them as he continued to absorb the world essence. As for the outsider Tao sovereign, considering that Meng Hao wasn't of a mind to do combat, there was little he could do. After all, although it might seem as if they were on the same level in terms of battle prowess, the truth of the matter was that Meng Hao was now just a bit stronger than the outsider Tao sovereign. Were it not for the fact that the world essence seemed unstable, as if it might fade away at any moment, then Meng Hao would definitely have already attacked and killed him, and then continued the absorption process later. Unfortunately, there was no time for that. His body flashed as he dodged a black sea of flames, after which he took in a deep breath, causing massive amounts of world essence to rumble toward him. As the world essence shrank down, miserable screams echoed out that could be heard nowhere else except in the minds of the outsiders. It was as if the world essence was begging its people, begging all lizard cultivators to help it. Throughout the mountain and sea realm, the outsiders were trembling, and expressions of grief could be seen on their faces. However, there was nothing they could do. Meng Hao continued to absorb the world essence, and his eyes began to glow with increasing brightness. He almost looked like a sun, radiating a dazzling, boundless light of understanding. He could clearly sense his thoughts racing faster than ever before. He could detect things that he had never been able to detect before, and could also feel the indescribable enlightenment of a Tao. It was as if the great Taos of heaven and earth were all there in front of him, and all he had to do was pick one and attempt to understand its fundamental nature. Then, it would be able to grow into an essence which belonged solely to him. This was not like the divine flame, which was an external entity and not his own. What he was able to do now actually came from his experiences back in the windswept realm. There, he had laid the foundation by coming to enlightenment regarding 3,000 great Taos. That became the sowing of karma, and today he was able to reap it. Understanding essence, he thought, his eyes flashing. I don't need to gain enlightenment of any outside essence. 3,000 great Taos, 3,000 essences. Nobody can have all 3,000. I only need enlightenment of 9 Taos. Those 9 Taos aren't anything I need to jealously attempt to acquire from others, but rather things which exist inside of me. There are definitely no essences more suitable to me than the 9 demon sealing hexes. I came up with this idea before to use the demon sealing hexing magics as my Tao realm essences. If each one of the hexes can be an essence, then, when I get all 9 hexes, I will have 9 essences, and that is when I, Meng Hao, will step into the pinnacle of the paragon level. Meng Hao's eyes were shining brightly, and his heart was pounding. As of this moment, he didn't hesitate at all. He went all out with every scrap of power he could muster to gain complete enlightenment of. The 8th demon sealing hex. Body-spirit hexing. In the instant that Meng Hao made his decision to seek enlightenment of the 8th demon sealing hex, rumbling sounds filled his mind as all of his mental faculties focused completely on that hex. His mind filled with a roaring like the crash of endless thunder as he analyzed the 8th demon sealing hex, focused on it, broke it apart and dug into it. He contemplated why the hex could cease the movement of the cultivation base, and he pondered how it could even control essence. He analyzed why the hex was even capable of locking down nascent divinities. He even analyzed how the 8th generation demon sealer created this particular hexing magic. Without the world essence, it would have taken Meng Hao a very, very long time to do something like this, and would have required constant research and contemplation. But now, the world essence almost seemed to make time move differently. It was as if 10,000 years passed by for Meng Hao with a single thought, benefiting him with all of the understanding he would come to in such a time. As he continued to analyze and ponder, screams echoed endlessly within the minds of the outsiders, and they knew that the motes of light that were the world essence were being uncontrollably absorbed by Meng Hao. In the blink of an eye, 30,000 motes of light had been sucked into him. His powers of deduction became more profound, and he could analyze things faster. His eyes gleamed so brightly that anyone who could actually see him would be shocked. It was at this point that an aura of enlightenment began to rise up from him, to merge with heaven and earth, as if he were becoming one with the world. This type of enlightenment was something that all cultivators dreamed of. It was Tao enlightenment. No, screamed the outsider Tao sovereign, eyes flashing with madness. Suddenly his body collapsed, spreading out into the starry sky to form a crimson sea of blood, upon which raged black flames. The red and the black mixed with each other, turning into violet. This was apparently some sort of spirit-dissolving grand magic. The outsider Tao sovereign was willing to abandon his fleshly body and his Tao foundation, to burn all of the power of his nascent divinity, to turn into a sea of flames that swept magnificently toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao did nothing to dodge or evade. His eyes shone with a strange light as the sea of blood surged toward him. Then he waved his finger. That wave of a finger didn't unleash the 8th demon sealing hex, and yet a powerful ripple spread out, causing the sea of blood to lurch to stop. However, it took only a moment to recover. Rumbling sounds echoed out as violet waves roared, sending blistering heat out toward Meng Hao, along with the power of extermination. Die! Screamed the outsider Tao sovereign from within the sea of blood, causing a massive pressure to erupt out, spreading out in all directions and then crushing down onto Meng Hao. This insane attack by the outsider Tao sovereign converged all of his willpower, and burned his cultivation base away in exchange for an attack that caused even Meng Hao to feel a twinge of fear. A boom could be heard, and blood oozed out of the corners of Meng Hao's mouth. His entire body was on fire as he staggered backward. And yet, he seemed to be completely ignoring that fact. A blankness could now be seen in his eyes, a blankness that came from deep and profound contemplation. It was almost as if he didn't see the danger which was right in front of him. Yi. The sea of blood transformed into a huge face, which was none other than that of the outsider Tao sovereign. He glared at Meng Hao with intense hatred, howling as the sea of blood suddenly began to swirl, emanating an even more terrifying aura than before as it shot toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao sat within the sea of flames, frowning, his eyes filled with the gleam of augury. No, it's not just a simple hexing magic, he muttered. The essence is hidden within the hexing magic. Suddenly, Meng Hao's eyes glittered. I need more world essence. Completely ignoring the sea of blood bearing down on him, he suddenly took a step forward. As his foot descended, the entire world seemed to superimpose upon itself. Then it split apart, as if he had walked into a different dimension, as if he were no longer within the mountain and sea realm. He was now outside of the sea of blood, which crashed onto his former position with a loud rumbling sound. At the same time, more of the world essence surged toward Meng Hao. 10,000, 20,000 in the blink of an eye, he had absorbed more than half of the world essence. His mind was now roaring, and his powers of deduction exploded, as he mentally broke apart the eighth demon sealing hex until finally, he saw the essence of the hexing magic. Space, a tremor ran through him. Chapter 1345, Hexing Magic Essence. Chapter 1346, Essence of Space. Meng Hao saw countless dimensions of space, all of them different sizes. Some were blurry, others were clear. They transformed into countless threads, threads that Meng Hao was very familiar with. Every time he unleashed the eighth hex, these threads would appear, bind whoever was the target of the magic, and seal their cultivation base as well as their nascent divinity. Originally, Meng Hao had assumed that the threads were natural laws of heaven and earth, but now that he could see them clearly, he understood that they were definitely not natural or magical laws. They were dimensional spaces. Numerous dimensional spaces superimposed over each other, and then exerted pressure onto a cultivator to seal their cultivation base and nascent divinity. Yes, this is how to truly lock someone down. Shackle the cultivation base with numerous dimensional spaces. In fact, it might be less appropriate to call it locking them down and more appropriate to call it a sealing. Meng Hao's mind was reeling, and his eyes shone with a strange light as the surrounding world essence continued to pour into him. The entire starry sky shook, and the outsider who had transformed into a sea of flames seethed as he once again bore down on Meng Hao. However, instead of slamming into Meng Hao, he passed right through him. It was as if Meng Hao was now hovering, not in the mountain and sea realm, but in some other dimensional space. The only thing which remained behind was a shadow, an image which everyone could see but not touch. As of this moment, Casadegarbha's heart was pounding. The outsider imperial lord he was fighting felt his mind trembling, and he gasped as he looked toward Meng Hao with complete astonishment. It wasn't just them. Paragon Sea Dream and the outsider Paragon Egu were also shocked. The mountain and sea lords, as well as the other Dao realm experts of the mountain and sea realm, all felt as if their minds were filled with crashing lightning as they realized that they could sense the aura of essence on Meng Hao. Meng Hao's expression was calm, but the glow of augury in his eyes radiated dazzlingly, and the world essence around him roared as he absorbed it with complete abandon. 60,000, 70,000, 80,000. Mere moments later, Meng Hao had absorbed more than 80,000 motes of light. Furthermore, he had entered a state in which something new was now floating in his mind. Essence formed from space. Why did the world have space, and what exactly was it? With the help of the world essence, Meng Hao was able to analyze the subject and to seek enlightenment of it. As of this moment, he had reached an unprecedentedly high peak. Rumbling could be heard as boundless light shone out from him to spread through the entire starry sky. As of this moment, all cultivators and all outsiders were completely shaken. The outsider Dao sovereign was doing everything he could think of, but was incapable of even touching Meng Hao. All he could do was watch as Meng Hao hovered there in the starry sky, and then closed his eyes. He was now truly gaining Dao enlightenment. "What is space?" Meng Hao murmured. The sound of his voice echoed out, causing the starry sky to shake. Although his eyes were closed, in his mind, he could see numerous dimensional spaces, spreading out in all directions, stretching out over such a vast area that they seemed limitless. Length is space. Height is space. Breadth is also space. Size can also be an expression of space. Among the countless dimensional spaces, he saw that they could be described in terms of length, height, breadth, and overall size. And yet all of that seemed to be only a portion of what space was. Those were all descriptions of space. However, Meng Hao still didn't understand everything clearly. There was something he was missing, something he hadn't grasped. His brow furrowed as he subconsciously continued to absorb more world essence power. He needed to increase his powers of augury and understanding, to gain enlightenment of the true meaning of the essence of space. As of this moment, he had completely forgotten about the sea of flames, about the mountain and sea realm, about the war. He was completely and utterly immersed in Dao enlightenment. The rest of the world was completely shaken. Both the mountain and sea realm and the outsiders had been in an uproar, but now they were silent. Even the imperial lord and the paragon said nothing. At long last, the outsider Dao sovereign, who had been trying every method possible to kill Meng Hao, finally had no choice but to stop unleashing his magic. It was pointless. As Meng Hao sought Dao enlightenment, the area around him distorted, occasionally expanding, occasionally contracting. Sometimes it would bulge upward and downward, and sometimes it would sweep out to the left or right. The outsider Dao sovereign was trembling in his form of the flame sea. He couldn't affect Meng Hao at all and in fact was prevented from even getting close to him. The closer he got, the more unstable the void became, until destructive rifts even began to open up. In the end, he simply fled. Currently nothing in existence could get close to that area, with the exception of Meng Hao, who was now gaining enlightenment of the essence of space. Meng Hao's body was also in a distorted state of transformation. Rumbling could be heard as he expanded, then shrunk. In one instant he was as tiny as a mustard seed, in another, as huge as the heavens. The outsider paragon looked at Meng Hao with mixed emotions, and then bitterly muttered, "The essence of space." From ancient times until now, numerous almighty experts have sought enlightenment of it. However, those who succeeded are as rare as phoenix feathers or killing horns. See Dream's eyes shone with a strange light as she watched Meng Hao, and a smile slowly broke out on her face. Everyone simply watched as Meng Hao hovered there with his eyes closed, the same as ever, seeking enlightenment. As of now, his state exceeded that of the 8th generation demon sealer when he actually created the 8th hex. At that time, he had only needed to understand the initial aspects regarding length, height, breadth, and size. With that, he had been able to create the 8th hex. On the other hand, what Meng Hao was contemplating was beyond that. He was contemplating the very essence of space. That was an essence filled with endless possibilities, and Meng Hao wanted to know all of them. Normally, that would be virtually impossible, but with the aid of the world essence, it was quite the opposite. Currently, rumbling sounds echoed out as Meng Hao continued to absorb more world essence like mad. By this point, Meng Hao had absorbed roughly 90%, 90,000 motes of light. He only continued to absorb them faster and faster. At this point, his augury and contemplation of enlightenment had reached the pinnacle. The final 10,000 motes of world essence light were sucked into him, whereupon his mind felt as if it had been split open by a massive boom that was so loud it was impossible to describe. Amidst the rumbling, his eyes snapped open, and although an abstruse gleam could be seen therein, there was nothing else that was vastly different. And yet, at the same time, the contrast between the blackness of his pupils and whites of his eyes was more distinct than ever. His eyes now sparkled, in a way that seemed to indicate that they were filled with a great Tao of heaven and earth. "So that's the essence of space," he said, smiling slightly. He could feel the essence of space fading away within him and could also sense his enhanced powers of augury and deduction dissipating. He sighed. In almost the same instant that Meng Hao's eyes opened, the instability in the surrounding void faded away. Furthermore, his body returned to the mountain and sea realm. When the maddened outsider Tao Sovereign saw that, his sea of flames form seethed, and he shot toward Meng Hao. Space is nothing more than countless threads formed together into a pattern. The patterns formed by those threads are space. Meng Hao shook his head, then waved his hand, causing a circle to appear beneath his feet. "I am currently within space," he said, looking down. Then he smiled as his enlightenment deepened. As for the sea of flames that was the outsider Tao Sovereign, it appeared to be on the verge of consuming Meng Hao, but to the Tao Sovereign's utter shock, he realized that the flames were stuck to the outside of the thread that formed the circle. This. The outsider Tao Sovereign's heart was battered by waves of shock, as were the hearts the other outsider Tao Sovereign and the Paragon. Space, he actually gained enlightenment of the essence of space. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he looked at the circle formed by the thread within which he stood. Then he smiled. "As for these threads, doesn't the essence I have gained enlightenment of consist of more than just the threads themselves? Within these threads are length, height, breadth, and size. They are limitless, and that is space. They are flat, but actually—" He waved his right hand, causing a thread to stretch out from the circle and then pass over him. In the blink of an eye, the circle of threads was no longer flat but had transformed into a sphere. With an additional thread, it is no longer a circle but a sphere, like a world. "It's too bad my enlightenment is insufficient and I can't sustain it for very long." Even as Meng Hao murmured to himself, the sphere collapsed and he sighed lightly. "In my eyes, the world is just a canvas." Meng Hao looked up at the shocked outsider who was still a sea of flames. Then Meng Hao waved his right hand, causing the flames to suddenly lock into place. Then they began to transform. No longer were they surrounding Meng Hao, but instead, they were now spreading out to form a static image of flames within the starry sky, like a painting. Then he waved his hand, and 4 threads appeared, surrounding the flames, almost as if they were a picture frame. "This is space," he said, his eyes flickering with a cold light. Rumbling could be heard as the sea of flames trembled. Inside, the outsider Tao Sovereign was howling bitterly. The fire seemed to be on the verge of slipping out of the shackles, of bursting out from within the threads that held it, and yet it could not. Finally, the flames converged together, transforming into a lizard of fire. It began to butt its head against the threads, and yet that did nothing. It could not free itself. It was completely sealed within what Meng Hao had created. The picture frame. The starry sky was like a canvas, and anyone who could control the essence of space could use their hands like a brush. With a few strokes, threads could be formed together into an outline. What was within that outline was space. If that canvas was folded, the subsequent cracks that were created were dimensional rifts. Furthermore, if the canvas could be formed into a sphere, then that space would be a world. Chapter 1347, A Cold Glow in the Eyes. Meng Hao chuckled and suddenly raised his hand into the air, slowly clenching his fist in the direction of the painting within which hung the outsider Dao Sovereign. It was as if he were crumpling a piece of paper into a ball. The canvas he had just created instantly transformed into ash. The outsider Dao Sovereign within let out a miserable cry and was then completely destroyed. The task left Meng Hao's face slightly pale, and inwardly he sighed. Because of the world essence of the first heaven, he had gained enlightenment of the Tao of the eighth hex's essence, which was even stronger than Meng Hao had imagined it would be. Although it was very draining, it only served to make him more convinced that his idea of using the hexing magics as the basis of his essences was the correct course. Unfortunately, considering my current cultivation base, I can only use this magic once per month. That limit to the usefulness of the magical technique was the only thing that Meng Hao was disappointed in. It was based completely on the level of his cultivation base and the essence power he could wield. After all, his true cultivation base was actually in the ancient realm, with 6 extinguished soul lamps. With the essence of space, I can seal the 6 essences level. That's my limit. If I were fighting an imperial lord, losing would be a possibility. And as for a paragon, Meng Hao shook his head. He was well aware that everything was dependent on the rise of his cultivation base and his control of more essence power. In fact, his enlightenment of the essence of space could be likened to a vastly deep pit, at the bottom of which was a tiny lake. Eventually, though, that deep pit would become a boundless sea of stars. Furthermore, enlightenment of the essence of the eighth hex was just the first benefit Meng Hao had gained from the world essence. There was also a second, and that was transformations to his blood. Meng Hao could clearly sense that, after absorbing the world essence of the first heaven, his all-heaven Tao immortal bloodline had experienced a strange change. Although that change wasn't large, it was a fundamental one that could shake the heavens and topple the earth. He wasn't sure exactly what that change entailed, but he could sense that his all-heaven bloodline was vastly different. He now knew that there was some completely extraordinary and astounding secret locked within the all-heaven bloodline, something that could perhaps raise him to unprecedented heights. After that change occurred, his all-heaven Tao immortal blood would experience another awakening, and he had the intense premonition that he would reach an unbelievable level. Perhaps that level was a realm that had never been seen before. As for what that realm was, Meng Hao didn't know, but he did know that if he wanted to elicit such an awakening in his all-heaven blood, then he needed to absorb more world essences. After the world essence of the first heaven had been completely absorbed, a slight sliver of awakening could be detected. In almost the exact same instant that Meng Hao finished absorbing the world essence, and his all-heaven Tao immortal bloodline showed signs of another awakening, something happened back on planet South Heaven. Shui Dongliu's eyes suddenly flickered, and a tremor ran through him. Ever since that kid changed his fate, I've been unable to see his future, he murmured. However, I have the feeling that he has the chance to become something above and beyond everything else, to reach the supreme realm. 1. Shui Dongliu initially talked about Meng Hao changing his fate in the events in the immortal ancient Taoist Rite Temple in chapter 819. Perhaps something even higher than that. Perhaps he can become that which was legendary even in the Paragon immortal realm, that which people put faith in from the beginning of creation until now, the immortal. In the vast expanse that is the starry sky, there is the god and the devil, but no immortal. Shui Dongliu was trembling, and a look of keen anticipation and focus could be seen in his eyes as he peered out into the starry sky toward Meng Hao. The immortal, from the moment that word came to be, no person, no entity has ever become the true immortal. The immortal stands alongside the god, is on equal footing with the devil, eternal in the starry sky. The uninformed think that the two great powers are coming because of a precious treasure. One of them seeks the return of the god, the other wishes to resurrect the devil. However, the truth is that their purpose is not limited to those things. They wish to stop the birth of the immortal. By seizing the power unleashed by the birth of the immortal and combining it with that of their precious treasures, they can at long last accomplish their true ambitions. Out in the starry sky, floating in the vicinity of Meng Hao, was something no one could see. It was a ship, upon which an old man sat cross-legged, staring silently at Meng Hao. Mixed emotions could be seen in his eyes as well as the gleam of enlightenment. Not too far off in a different direction was Slaughter, dressed in a black robe, hovering there like an unsheathed sword. Although he was surrounded by a profoundly murderous aura, no one could sense him as he remained in place, studying Meng Hao thoughtfully. At the same time that Meng Hao gained a bit of enlightenment regarding the transformations to his bloodline, and a spark of anticipation rose up in his heart. Something happened down in the mountain and sea realm, where everyone was still reeling in shock from the sight of Meng Hao destroying the first heaven and absorbing its world essence. An astonishing, deafening roar rose up from the direction of the fourth mountain and sea, and at the same time, a power like that of a paragon suddenly erupted out. Simultaneously, Xianxia bellowed, and yet was incapable of preventing a certain figure from bursting out from the fourth mountain and sea. It was none other than the outsider imperial lord. He was at the peak of the six essences level, half a step into being a paragon. Originally, Xianxia had been able to pin him down, but clearly he was now benefiting from the aid of the outsider paragon, who couldn't break free from Sea Dream, and had apparently decided to help the imperial lord to break free. Now that imperial lord was bursting with his peak level of power, taking advantage of the fluctuations caused by the appearance of Meng Hao's essence to break free from Xianxia and charge forth an attack. He was a sea of flames that shot through the void like a meteor, bursting with intense cultivation base power as he closed in on Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and he momentarily glanced off in a different direction, which was none other than the location where Paragon Sea Dream was fighting the outsider Paragon. Unfortunately, he was currently unable to transmit any information to Sea Dream, so he looked back at the Imperial Lord and then, instead of retreating, advanced. The outsider Imperial Lord looked completely awe-inspiring, and his eyes were bursting with mad killing intent. Based on the fluctuations of his cultivation base, he was completely going all out with his essence power. The sea of flames transformed into a vortex, and after that materialized 5 successive vortexes, each one larger than the one before it. 6 vortexes could be seen, all of them emanating essence power that shook the starry sky and caused all onlookers to gasp. This terrifying power exceeded that of a Tao sovereign. It was the most shocking level of power that existed beneath a paragon's. The power within any one of those vortexes was more than half of that of a Tao sovereign, and in fact, 2 vortexes together could easily crush that level. When you added 6 of them together, the essence power they emanated would enable the imperial lord who wielded it to crush any Tao sovereign. This was the power of an imperial lord. Even Xianxia, who could rely on the river of reincarnation and the sea of the yellow springs, who had countless Yama palaces from the fourth mountain, and who could draw upon the Joss flame power of innumerable dead souls, would not be able to fight back against the outsider imperial lord in this state. In this situation, the reality was that the outsider imperial lord now had enough power to wipe out Xianxia. As he charged forth at top speed, he didn't rely on any magical technique or other tricks. Instead, he drew upon terrifying essence power as he prepared to completely crush Meng Hao. Extending both hands, he then clapped them together viciously. Rumbling sounds could then be heard as the first of the vortexes passed through him and shot toward Meng Hao. As Meng Hao closed in, his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, summoning numerous mountains. He transformed into a huge azure rock, and then shot like lightning toward that incoming vortex. A massive boom echoed out as the vortex collapsed, and Meng Hao's mountains shattered. At the same time, his azure rock form continued to speed toward the outsider imperial lord. At the same time, the second vortex screamed forth to appear directly in front of Meng Hao. The resulting boom sent colors flashing through the sky and caused the stars to shudder. Meng Hao's azure rock form collapsed, and he appeared in his normal form, clenching his right hand into a fist and unleashing a fist strike. The vortex trembled, and then cracking sounds rang out as it collapsed into pieces. Meng Hao's face was ashen, and he backed up a bit. It was at that point that the third and fourth vortexes closed in. The destructive power of extermination erupted out as the full power of an imperial lord was unleashed. Meng Hao's face flickered, His fleshly body power was now thrumming at its peak, and his cultivation base exploded out. The Paragon Bridge appeared, and divine flame blasted out as he unleashed 3 successive fist strikes. Life Extermination Fist, Bedevilment Fist, God-slaying Fist. 3 fist strikes were joined by the crushing Paragon Bridge and the rumbling divine flame. The third vortex collapsed, and at the same time, Meng Hao coughed up a mouthful of blood. Then he fell back, relying on the strength of his fleshly body to bear the brunt of the terrifying fourth vortex and its essence power. A boom rang out, and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he tumbled backward like a kite with its string cut. The direction in which he fell seemed to be in accord with the outsider Imperial Lord's plan. Unexpectedly, it was the direction leading toward where the outsider Paragon was fighting Paragon Sea Dream. Meng Hao's face fell, and he was apparently on the verge of trying to change directions when the outsider Imperial Lord snorted coldly. Killing, intent raging, he sent the fifth vortex flying forward in shocking fashion. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as his Green Emperor's eternal incantation worked like mad to heal his injuries. At the same time, he raised his right hand and unleashed demon-sealing hexing magic. Rumbling could be heard as streams of hexing magic shot out, bolstered by the power of the mountains and seas as they bore down on the fifth vortex. 7th hex, 6th hex, 5th hex, 3rd hex, 2nd hex. His 8th hex had become essence, but the other 5 hexing magics turned into sealing marks which absorbed the power of the mountains and seas, causing them to grow in size to 3,000 meters as they neared the fifth vortex. As they slammed into the vortex, they were wiped out one by one, and Meng Hao coughed up successive mouthfuls of blood. He fell back again, the backlash power wreaking havoc upon his body. However, the fifth vortex also collapsed. At the same time, deep within his eyes was something that no observer would be able to detect, a cold, grim anticipation. /expand. When the fifth vortex collapsed, its attack power blasted out in all directions. Within the blood that sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth were chunks of internal organs, and he was yet again sent tumbling backward toward the Paragon battlefield. By now, he was only about 30,000 meters away. "Today, I'll kill you as a sacrifice to the first heaven," roared the outsider Imperial Lord. His eyes were bright red as he strode forward, sending the sixth and final vortex rumbling forward. From the fact that Meng Hao could withstand the attack of the fifth vortex, it was possible to see how powerful he was. He was already far beyond the level of a Six Essences Tao Sovereign. However, when facing an Imperial Lord who was halfway into the Paragon level, he didn't quite seem to be able to match up. Sixth Vortex was the most majestic of them all, and it was currently causing the starry sky to twist and distort. All laws of nature and magic were ripped to shreds as the vortex shot toward Meng Hao. As it bore down on him, his eyes were bright red. He lifted his hand, summoning the battle weapon. The meat jelly appeared, forming a suit of armor, and the mastiff became a cape. Meng Hao threw his head back and roared, rapidly growing to a height of 3,000 meters. At the same time, the battle weapon grew longer, and its appearance more fearsome. Meng Hao didn't fall back. He knew that there was no avoiding this attack. Therefore, he hefted the battle weapon and then slashed it out toward the sixth vortex. "Cleave," he bellowed. The battle weapon shone with brilliant light, becoming a dazzling beam that slashed down into the sixth vortex. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as the entire vortex was completely cleaved in two. However, Meng Hao paid a steep and bitter price as a result. The battle weapon vanished, the armor shattered, and the meat jelly let out a miserable scream. The blood mastiff howled in anguish, and the parrot was left shivering in pain. As for Meng Hao, his body shook violently as most of his bones were shattered. At the same time, nearly half of his flesh exploded into a cloud of gore and blood. His consciousness went dim, and he almost looked like a skeleton. In addition to all that, he was sent spinning backward toward where the Paragons were fighting, until he was less than 3,000 meters away. The outsider Imperial Lord stilled his cultivation base, and then looked up with a vicious smile. "Now you're dead for sure." The words spoken did not come out of the mouth of the Imperial Lord, but rather came from behind Meng Hao. The speaker was none other than outsider Paragon Egu. His booming voice was laced with rage as he suddenly broke away from Sea Dream and shot toward Meng Hao. Sea Dream could only keep him locked down to a certain extent, and 3,000 meters was within that area. Meng Hao was now within that 3,000-meter distance. However, it was at this point that a slight smile suddenly appeared on his face, as if he had been waiting for just this moment. Kesidagarba's face drained of blood, and Sea Dream frowned, as if she found the situation very strange. However, there was no way to change what was happening, and definitely no way to stop it. The outsider paragon and imperial lord were joining forces to try to kill Meng Hao. Obviously, not even the imperial lord was confident in being able to slay Meng Hao on his own. Therefore, he chose the most simple and direct way to deal with the situation, which was force Meng Hao close enough to the paragons, force him into that 3,000-meter range in which the paragon would have a chance to make a move. Meng Hao appeared to have completely lost the initiative in the fight, having been forced back step by step until he was in a position of extreme danger. In fact, the outsider imperial lord, fearful of Meng Hao's lightning cauldron, had even prepared a special technique just to counteract it. Therefore, he couldn't help but wonder why it was that Meng Hao still hadn't attempted form displacement transposition. And then the imperial lord saw the slight smile on Meng Hao's face and suddenly felt his heart thump. His face flickered as a sense of deep foreboding suddenly welled up from the depths of his heart. However, he couldn't think of where the problem lay. Why would Meng Hao be smiling in the middle of such a deadly, critical situation? Is it his essence of space? Impossible. Not even essence could be used to defend against the attack of a paragon. Then what could it be? What is making this kid smile? He even seems like he's been waiting. Just now, it seemed like I was forcing him to get closer to the paragon battlefield, but now it seems almost like he was heading there on purpose. Something's wrong. Something's definitely wrong. The outsider imperial lord's face flickered, but no matter how he considered the problem, no answer revealed itself. Although the outsider paragon couldn't see Meng Hao's smile, as a paragon, he had lived for countless years. How could he not have noticed the indications that Meng Hao had done this on purpose? However, even he wasn't sure exactly why Meng Hao was confident enough to do that. Well, it doesn't matter what trick you're trying to pull, nobody can get this close to a paragon and survive. Paragon Egu snorted coldly. He was completely confident, a confidence born from the mere fact that he was a paragon. He strode forward, clenching his right hand into a fist and then slamming it down toward Meng Hao. Paragon power exploded out. This fist strike was strong enough to destroy not just Meng Hao, but the void itself. It was as if it would destroy the starry sky and completely obliterate the entire area in which Meng Hao existed. The power of a paragon could suppress essence, could dominate anything and everything. Paragon Egu was completely confident that, with the exception of an 8 essences paragon, no one could possibly have a hope of saving Meng Hao. In fact, even if there were an 8 essences paragon, that person would have to be in the immediate vicinity to have the time to do anything. He was sure that on this very day Meng Hao would die. It took only the blink of an eye for the power of the paragon's fist to cause blood to spurt out all over Meng Hao's body. The starry sky around him shattered as an indescribably shocking power rumbled toward him. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were crying out in alarm. In contrast, the outsiders were overjoyed. They hated Meng Hao for destroying their homeland, and yet they feared him. Therefore, to see what was happening now left them elated. The mountain and sea lords were all stunned and had various expressions on their faces. Grandpa Meng was trembling, and it seemed as if tears of blood were about to pour down his cheeks. In the 4th mountain and sea, Su Qing's face was ashen, as if everything had lost meaning to her. Siddhigarbha stood there, taciturn, and back in the 9th mountain and sea, all of the chosen were gaping in shock. They simply couldn't imagine a situation in which Meng Hao actually died. Fang Ziyufeng threw his head back and howled. All of the members of the Fang clan were crying out in grief and rage, and yet none of them could do anything. Si Dream was the only one who reacted differently. The same frown could be seen on her face, but she made no move to interfere. In fact, when she looked at Meng Hao, a thoughtful expression appeared. The power of a paragon was crushing down toward Meng Hao, and the void around him was shattering. An unprecedented sensation of deadly crisis rose up within him, and even as the heaven shaking, earth-shattering power bore down on him, he turned to face the enormous form of outsider Paragon Egu. He almost seemed to be studying his opponent. The outsider imperial lord's heart was now filled with anxiety, as though there were a voice inside of him screaming that something was very wrong. However, having thought everything through, he sent his divine sense out and couldn't detect anything suspicious in the area. It was in that very moment, when Meng Hao seemed to be on the verge of completely collapsing, that he laughed. Despite his shattering body, he laughed in a way that seemed to defy heaven and earth. Within his laughter was a power that few people would be able to comprehend, but as soon as Paragon Egu heard it, his face filled with disbelief. In fact, the astonishment and terror visible in his expression exceeded what had appeared there when the first heaven had collapsed. "You," he said hoarsely. He suddenly raised his right hand in front of him and fell back at top speed. This scene caused all of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm to gape in shock. The outsiders were stunned. Xianxia's eyes went wide, and Paragon Sea Dream was panting, as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Clearly, what she found unbelievable wasn't the fact that the outsider Paragon was fleeing, but rather something else. In almost the same moment that the outsider Paragon began to flee in alarm and frustration, Meng Hao's hoarse voice floated out. "You can't escape, Paragon Egu." When the outsider Imperial Lord heard those words, his mind reeled. He stared in complete incredulity and even began to shake. The idea of a paragon fleeing like this was simply unimaginable. Paragon Egu even seemed terrified, an expression that the Imperial Lord had never seen on the face of a paragon. This, he thought, trembling. Without even thinking about it, he began to edge backward. All of a sudden, he realized that Meng Hao was wrapped up in far too many secrets, terrifying, incomprehensible secrets. Even as Meng Hao spoke, Paragon Egu let out a miserable shriek. This was the first time he had ever lost his composure in this way, and the first time he had ever been completely terrified. In fact, this was the first time since becoming a paragon that he had truly feared for his own soul. "Who are you? You're not a cultivator from the mountain and sea realm. Who are you?" Egu, a paragon, refused to surrender. "You? Just who are you exactly?" Paragon Egu's shrill voice echoed out, backed by the cultivation base of a paragon, to fill the entire mountain and sea realm. The starry sky trembled and the mountains and seas shook. Countless cultivators and outsiders all coughed up blood. No one could see clearly what was happening except for Paragon Egu, Sea Dream, and Meng Hao. What was visible to them was a shadowy, misty form in front of Meng Hao. It was impossible to see what exactly was inside that mist, but it radiated a sensation of indescribable terror. Then, gray threads began to spread out from the mist toward Paragon Egu, moving at incredible speed as they began to wrap him up. Then they started boring into him, transforming into magical symbols that flickered on his skin, although they were invisible to virtually everyone. No voice emanated out from the mist in reaction to the screams of Paragon Egu, only more gray threads. It was almost as if they were locking down his karma, making it impossible for him to escape. At the same time, an increasing number of flickering magical symbols appeared on him. "Come to me," Meng Hao said with a faint smile, his voice somehow completely awe-inspiring. "Henceforth, I'm your master for all eternity." His body was rapidly healing thanks to the Green Emperor's eternal incantation, and a strange light could be seen in his eyes. As the words left his mouth, Paragon Egu shivered and then slowly plodded back toward Meng Hao. To everyone watching, it was a completely bizarre sight. The outsider Imperial Lord's mind was spinning, and his face was as pale as death. Without the slightest hesitation, he began to retreat. He was filled with complete and utter terror of Meng Hao and wanted nothing more than to get as far away from him as possible. Chapter 1348, Enslaving a Paragon. Chapter 1349, The Unyielding Soul of a Paragon. Paragon Sea Dream's eyes flickered as she looked at the misty figure in front of Meng Hao. Waves of shock battered her heart. Not even she would ever have imagined that Meng Hao would be able to call upon assistance such as this. He could actually turn a paragon into a puppet. Enslaved a paragon. Although Egu was only in the 7 essences level, that was a level that was considered powerful even in the days of the paragon immortal realm. In those days, there had been one 9 essences paragon, one 8 essences paragon, and one 7 essences paragon, which was Sea Dream herself. The current 33 heavens had 5 paragons, and although Sea Dream couldn't be sure of the exact cultivation base of each and every one, she did know that they had no 9 essences paragons. If they did, then the war would have broken out much earlier. In fact, the 33 heavens had been holding back for that specific reason. As such, a 7 essences paragon would clearly be an immense asset on the battlefield. If Meng Hao could turn one into his slave, then it meant the war with the 33 heavens wasn't a hopeless struggle. A full 7 essences paragon is comparable to the combined power of 5 of the heavens. Sea Dream was panting. Despite the level of her willpower and how incredibly long she had lived, even she was shaken, and a gleam of anticipation appeared in her eyes. Xianxia had the same reaction, and his eyes were shining with a strange light. The sudden reversal in events left him both shocked and yet intensely excited. As for the other mountain and sea lords, their hearts all surged with excitement, with the exception of Jai Tian, who sat there reticently. Then there was Shui Dongliu. Startled, he slowly lowered his right hand. Were it not for this sudden change, he would have been forced to intervene. By now it was clear that Meng Hao was absolutely critical to the mountain and sea realm. That is good fortune which belongs solely to him, Shui Dongliu murmured, a wide smile visible on his face. At the same time, cultivators in other parts of the mountain and sea realm were able to deduce what was happening, and they began to go wild with joy and disbelief. Enslaved a paragon. Heavens, Meng Hao actually figured out a way to enslave a paragon. As the cries rang out, even the mountain and sea cultivators who weren't able to see exactly what was happening were shaken and could hardly believe what they were hearing. As for the outsiders, their blood connections made it much easier for them to discern what was happening up in the starry sky. The terrified cries of their paragon caused expressions of despair to appear on their faces. Although they might otherwise have gained desperate strength from their grief and rage over the loss of their homeland, at this moment they had lost all hope and were doomed. They could sense the imperial lord fleeing and could hear the screams of the paragon. When you added in the fact that their home had been destroyed, the shadow of defeat instantly enveloped their hearts. They had been defeated. Thoroughly and utterly defeated. They were defeated and had nowhere to retreat to. The invasion of the first heaven had turned into a complete disaster. Before invading, they had scorned and disdained the mountain and sea realm. But now they had to admit that, even if the mountain and sea realm were weaker than it was now, the first heaven would never have been able to overcome it. This was where the Paragon Immortal realm lived on, the same Paragon Immortal realm which had once been the higher realm, far above them. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the outsiders trembled and began to fall back in retreat. However, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had the exact opposite reaction. Exuberant shouts rang out as their blood began to boil. The first heaven had collapsed, and the spirits of the mountain and sea cultivators had risen up. Seeing a paragon on the verge of being enslaved gave them hope. At long last, the slumbering mountain and sea realm was opening its eyes. It was awakening. Are you Up in the starry sky, Meng Hao's eyes shone with a strange light as he looked at Paragon Igu slowly approaching him. At the same time, his Green Emperor's eternal incantation was rapidly healing him. It was then that an unyielding roar erupted out of Paragon Igu's mouth. He had finally managed to suppress the terror inside of him, and his unyielding heart was now bursting with power. I am a paragon, he howled. A tremor ran through him as he tried to fight back against the gray threads which had him bound up. Then he ground to a halt and stared at the misty figure in front of Meng Hao. Although he had stopped moving toward Meng Hao, he was trembling and then blood began to spurt out all over his body. However, he remained in place, unmoving. He turned to look at Meng Hao and a blazing pride erupted out from inside of him. I've practiced cultivation for tens upon tens of thousands of years. I have a longevity the same as that of heaven and earth. I'm a paragon, subjugator of countless worlds, worshipped by innumerable living beings. How could I possibly let you enslave me? He was shivering, and blood oozed out all over him, and yet he remained in place, relying on his life force and his very dignity to resist the illusory figure in front of Meng Hao that was attempting to enslave him. His right hand trembled as he lifted it up and waved his finger viciously toward Meng Hao, and yet that simple movement caused his face to go deathly pale as he discovered that the gray threads were interfering with his cultivation base, making it impossible for him to unleash its power. That grayness and that figure in front of Meng Hao caused his heart to be filled with terror. Suddenly, he chuckled bitterly, and then threw his head back and let out a bitter howl. I am Igu. I watched the destruction of the Paragon Immortal realm. I helped the 33 heavens rise to prominence. I witnessed the sealing of the mountain and sea realm. I fought in this bloody battle to wipe out all life in the mountain and sea realm. I've lived for tens upon tens of thousands of years. I have practiced cultivation to the level of a paragon. I am a paragon, Paragon Igu. The deafening sound of Paragon Igu's bitter laughter pierced out to fill the entire mountain and sea realm, and even higher up into the 32 heavens above. Ripples filled the starry sky, which was caused by the attempts of the other 32 heavens to break through the barrier and enter the mountain and sea realm. Heaven can't make me bow, earth can't make me drop to my knees, and the starry sky can't make me lower my head. My will is the Tao of the heaven, and my body is limitless in the vast expanse. Paragon Egu roared as his body rapidly grew in size. In the blink of an eye, he was 3,000 meters high, then 15,000 meters, then 30,000 meters. As a 30,000-meter giant, he looked like a deity. Meng Hao's pupils constricted as he sensed the unyielding will of this outsider paragon, a willpower that apparently could not be wiped away by either heaven or earth. Suddenly, the gray threads of Chu Tai's magical technique began to unravel. To enslave a paragon might sound easy, but the truth was that all paragons were blazing suns within heaven and earth. They represented the convergence of luck and destiny, and thus could not easily be made slaves. Their willpower, their thoughts, and their hearts surpassed the heavens. Rumbling sounds could be heard as more and more of the gray threads began to snap. Deep in his heart, Meng Hao couldn't help but admire this paragon's willpower, his fighting spirit, and his unyielding heart. With all of that, he truly deserved the title of paragon. It was at this point that the blurry figure in front of Meng Hao let out a cold snort. Suddenly, 10 times as many gray threads as before exploded out, then 100 times more than that. They began to wrap around the 30,000-meter-tall paragon in an even more complicated fashion than before. It took only a moment before the paragon was not only back under control, but also beginning to kneel toward Meng Hao. "I refuse," Paragon Egu shrieked. Blood oozed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and he was shaking violently. And yet he remained standing, as if not even the vast heavens and earth could force his legs to bend. Cracking sounds rang out and blood sprayed out of his mouth. And yet he still didn't bend a knee. A vast quantity of scales appeared all over him, each one of them radiating intense ancientness. He seemed to be on the verge of transforming into an ancient and archaic lizard. However, the gray threads continued to bore into him, causing magical symbols to appear, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meng Hao was visibly moved, but remained silent, mixed emotions playing out in his eyes. If the mountain and sea realm and the 33 heavens weren't at war, then this paragon would truly be deserving of worship by all life. Meng Hao sighed, and then addressed Paragon Egu directly. "If you will support the mountain and sea realm, then I will spare the lives all of your people from the first heaven." Paragon Egu shivered, and despite the pain coursing through him, the look in his eyes was as unyielding as ever. He even began to laugh. "The mountain and sea realm will definitely be exterminated. As long as only one of my people remains alive in the end, then years from now, we will make a comeback. I am Egu, I am a paragon now, and I will be a paragon in death. You want me to submit, you want me to be your slave. The only slave you will have is my body, not my soul." As he laughed uproariously, the signs of an imminent self-detonation appeared. There was no madness in his eyes, only endless pride. He would rather die than bow his head and lose his dignity. Rumbling could be heard as destructive fluctuations began to emanate out from him. However, because he could not unleash the power of his cultivation base, the destructive blast would not sweep out into the mountain and sea realm to wreak mass destruction. He would only be able to harm himself. But that way, even if he died, his body would be useless to Meng Hao. Even as Meng Hao frowned, Chu Tai's voice suddenly echoed in his mind. "Paragons can't be forced to submit unless you erase their souls." "Then erase his soul," Meng Hao said decisively, staring at Paragon Egu. The moment that he opened his mouth, the gray threads which bound Paragon Egu suddenly turned black and began to emanate a strange light. It turned into a destructive power that poured into Paragon Egu, a power of soul annihilation. In the very moment in which he was about to self-detonate, massive rumbling sounds echoed out as some unknown method was used. To erase his soul. Muffled rumbling could be heard as the threads faded away. The blurry figure in front of Meng Hao now seemed weak beyond compare. Finally, a faint voice spoke. "I've fulfilled my promise. I shall sleep now until the moment when my master is resurrected. I hope that you can keep your end of the agreement." Gradually, the weak voice faded away into nothing. The blurry, misty figure also vanished. In the same moment, Paragon Egu's body shivered, and his eyes went completely and utterly blank. The ripples of self-detonation faded away, and he lowered his head as he knelt in front of Meng Hao. Chapter 1350, Full-Scale Counterattack. What was kneeling was the body of a paragon, not the soul. However, that act of kneeling caused all of the outsiders in the mountain and sea realm to go deathly quiet. Their minds went completely blank as death. With the exception of the professional soldiers or the especially warlike individuals, most of the outsiders, regardless of which tribe they came from, were fighting for their homes, their people, and especially for more cultivation resources. Therefore, the collapse of the first heaven caused the minds and hearts of all the outsiders to tremble. They were left blank and terrified and filled with regret. Their home was gone. Their fellow tribe members were dead. There was no point to the war anymore. Given enough time, their thirst for revenge would eventually spur them to hold nothing back in fighting. However, before that could happen, their paragon had been enslaved, a huge blow that crushed their will and reduced their morale to the freezing point. Off in the distance, the fleeing imperial lord suddenly stopped and forced himself to look back. What he saw was the towering 30,000-meter-tall paragon kneeling in front of Meng Hao, and his mind reeled. Defeated, he muttered in a hoarse, despairing voice. The events leading up to the destruction of the first heaven had caused him to fly into a rage, and even put his life on the line in a mad attempt to intervene. Although most of the other outsiders had been at a complete loss, he had been quick to regain control of his thoughts and jump on the offensive. But then he watched their paragon be enslaved, and he was filled with bitterness. He even regretted his decision to flee and felt guilty. With all the complicated thoughts assailing him, all the outsider imperial lord could do was chuckle bitterly. A strange expression could be seen on Sea Dream's face as she looked at the enslaved paragon. Although she was excited, she couldn't help but sigh. She was also a paragon, someone who stood at the pinnacle of heaven and earth, so she knew how difficult a task it must have been for that mysterious figure to force Igu to yield. In sharp contrast to the outsiders were the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. After a brief moment of silence, they exploded out with an exuberance that could shake heaven and earth. It started in the fourth mountain and sea and quickly spread all the way to the first and ninth mountains and seas. Soon, the voices of the entire mountain and sea realm were crying out in a powerful voice. Victory belongs to the mountains and seas. Victory belongs to the mountains and seas. Victory belongs to the mountains and seas. It was impossible to say who said it first, but soon those words rang out throughout the entire mountain and sea realm. Everything began to shake as orders were delivered to begin fighting back against the outsiders. In all of the 9 mountains and seas, the cultivators counterattacked. Few of the remaining outsiders possessed a will to fight. Their eyes were blank and they trembled in fear. The first heaven was destroyed. Their home was gone. Their tribe members were dead. Their paragon had been enslaved. Everything that had happened filled them with complete despair. When the mountain and sea realm began to fight back, and the excited battle cries rose up, Meng Hao looked at the kneeling 30,000-meter-tall paragon, and his eyes filled with a complicated expression. He sighed. Then he clasped hands and bowed deeply. That bow was a bow toward the unyielding soul of the paragon. For a moment, he felt pity that Igu's soul had been erased, but then the complex look in his eyes was replaced with coldness. When experts were enemies, they could respect each other, but they could never back down. Sometimes the only option was death. One party died or the other died. In war, pity could not be tolerated, nor could compassion, and especially not weakness. Besides, this battle was only the beginning. In any case, I don't need your soul. I just need your paragon body. Although that makes your battle prowess slightly lower, you're still a paragon. Meng Hao flickered into motion, flying up to land atop the 30,000-meter paragon's head. Now that he had control of this body, a mere thought on his part could make the paragon puppet do anything he wished. In the same moment that Meng Hao landed on the head of the paragon puppet, the puppet slowly rose to its feet, energy surging out in all directions. As of this moment, Meng Hao was completely shocking in every aspect. Not only did his cultivation base place him at the highest level in the mountain and sea realm in terms of battle prowess, now that he had a paragon puppet, he was at the absolute pinnacle. However, none of that could compare to what Meng Hao himself now symbolized. After destroying the first heaven and enslaving a paragon, he was now the symbol of the spirit of the mountain and sea realm. His eyes glittered as he turned to look at Sea Dream, toward whom he immediately clasped hands and bowed. Looking at her caused him to feel quite regretful and apologetic. Voice soft, he said, "Senior Sea Dream, back then, I was ignorant and naive. I was only thinking about myself, not the mountains and seas. Senior, I hope that you aren't too deeply offended by what I said." With that, he clasped hands and bowed again. Just as he had said, years ago he hadn't cared much at all about the mountain and sea realm, which led to his altercation with Sea Dream after the events in the windswept realm. Now that he thought back to that time, he realized that he had indeed spoken a bit too harshly. 1. Meng Hao spoke some harsh words to Sea Dream in chapters 1151 and 1152. Dream smiled slightly, which was something she rarely did. It made her look like a beautiful, blooming peony flower. Warmth and kindness filled her gaze as she looked back at Meng Hao. To her, he was merely a member of the younger generation, a child really. "You just go take care of whatever it is you need to," she said. Meng Hao nodded and without any further hesitation, sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Then he sent out some divine will, causing the paragon puppet's eyes to shine, almost as if they were Meng Hao's. After sending his divine will into the paragon puppet, it was like his own body, completely under his control. At the same time, it emanated the terrifying aura of a paragon. Of course, Meng Hao himself had divine sense that was 80% as powerful as a paragon's, which ensured that he could easily unleash 80% of the power of Paragon Egu. With a single step, the paragon puppet stepped across the starry sky to appear in front of the outsider imperial lord. "Acknowledge allegiance or perish," Meng Hao said through the mouth of the paragon puppet. The voice crashed out, echoing throughout the mountain and sea realm. The imperial lord laughed bitterly as he looked at the paragon puppet version of Egu standing in front of him, a paragon who had once been one of his own people. His eyes gleamed with madness, and even a desire for death. If Paragon Egu would rather die than yield, then as an imperial lord, he would not make the same mistake he had before in backing down. "You destroyed my home, you killed my people, and now you think I'm going to acknowledge allegiance to you. Even if I perish, I'll turn into a vengeful ghost that will curse your mountain and sea realm for generations to come." The imperial lord threw his head back and laughed, unleashing the explosive power of his cultivation base and causing 6 vortexes to appear behind him. A strange expression appeared on Meng Hao's face as he stared at the imperial lord for a moment, then said, "You words seem very righteous, very unyielding, and very hateful." The thunderous boom of Meng Hao's voice caused the outsider imperial lord's energy to suddenly falter. Without waiting to engage in any more rhetoric, Meng Hao sent the paragon puppet's hand out, and immediately the starry sky around the imperial lord was shattered. The imperial lord's body began to vibrate, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. He fell back, waving his hand to send countless magical items flying out. The 6 vortexes behind him shot through him toward Meng Hao, who sent the paragon puppet's fist flying out in a fist strike. "It seems you've forgotten that the invaders in this war came, not from the mountain and sea realm, but from the 33 heavens." As Meng Hao's voice echoed out, the fist crushed the void and shattered the starry sky. All of the magical items were reduced to powder, and the 6 essence vortexes were destroyed. Then the blow landed on the outsider imperial lord, whose legs exploded. Having escaped death, he once again fell back in retreat. "This war wasn't the idea of the mountain and sea realm, it was yours. How could Meng Hao possibly let this outsider off the hook?" His words crashed out like thunder, causing the imperial lord's mind to tremble as he realized that Meng Hao's words, despite being difficult to accept, were true. This war really had been instigated by the 33 heavens, and they really were the invaders. "Well, so what?" howled the imperial lord. "We haven't even destroyed the mountain and sea realm yet, but then you went and wiped out our people. You're the ones who exterminated our home first." No longer concerned about whether what he said made sense, he transformed into his true form, a gigantic lizard thousands of meters long and covered with raging black flames. Then he charged toward Meng Hao and the paragon puppet. "The mountain and sea realm is definitely going to be wiped out." "As for whether the mountain and sea realm will be wiped out," Meng Hao replied coolly, "I can't say for sure, but what I do know is that you are going to die right now." With that, the paragon puppet's hand performed an incantation gesture, then waved out, causing the full power of a paragon to explode out, sealing the entire area like a cage and then crushing down with incredible pressure. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the imperial lord began to shake. Blood oozed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and the black flames which covered his body were extinguished. His scales exploded, and he screamed bitterly. Then, the pressure caused his entire body to explode as he was completely killed. After killing the outsider imperial lord, Meng Hao felt weak. Personally controlling the paragon puppet was quite draining. As he sat there on the paragon puppet's head, his eyes suddenly snapped open and he looked down at the mountain and sea realm. A bit of divine will sent the paragon puppet down into the mountains and seas. Wherever it appeared, the outsiders who saw it were filled with despair. Some felt insanity, some felt bitterness. They were now fighting a hopeless fight, and apparently there was nothing they could do about it. They were the invaders, but now they were feeling what it was like be the invaded. That was the double-edged sword which is war. This first battle with the 33 heavens can now be concluded. The most powerful outsider remaining from the first heaven was Long Lindsay, who was fighting with Patriarch Reliance. As of this moment, he trembled and began to flee. Snorting coldly, Patriarch Reliance immediately gave chase. The outsiders from the first heaven were in complete chaos. Expand. The mountain and sea realm counterattacked with full force. The flames of war climbed high into the sky in a way that was different from before. This time, it was not the mountain and sea cultivators who suffered defeat after defeat, it was the outsiders. In the first mountain and sea, Echelon cultivator Dao Heaven led the army of cultivators into battle. On every front, the outsiders were routed and crushed. Many of them didn't even dare to fight back. Anyone could see that at this moment, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm wore expressions of utter self-confidence, and that their fighting spirit was indomitable. Sometimes in battle, practicers of cultivation were known to self-detonate, to literally explode in a final burst of grandeur for their people. However, such acts were born of grief and desperation, and led to nothing but death. Using tactics like that could cause the enemy to respect or even fear you, but could not make that enemy feel powerless. In sharp contrast, when an entire people was bursting with confidence and spirit combined, they became truly fear-inspiring. As of this moment, that was exactly how the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were. Upon awakening, they were filled with a madness, with a majesty that caused the outsiders' minds to tremble. It wasn't that the outsiders never thought to go all out in a mad scramble to fight back, or that they didn't consider resorting to self-detonation. Those things were useless. They tried. As the mountain and sea cultivators fought back, outsiders self-detonated, or went all out in various attempts to drag their opponents with them into mutual destruction. And yet, none of that did any good. In the second mountain and sea, fierce fighting raged. As for the third mountain and sea, it was completely filled with the stench of blood. The cultivators there had experienced something like a baptism in blood. Their eyes shone brightly, glowing with confidence, with hope, with ferocity, and with madness. The hatred they felt surpassed the hatred within the hearts of the outsiders, as did their confidence. When it came to their hope, even their hope was something the outsiders could never match. Rumbling could be heard as the battle for the fourth mountain and sea neared its conclusion even more quickly. Under Su Qing's leadership, and with the return of Xianxia to the battlefield, the grand army there swept across the enemy with virtually no resistance. However, Xianxia himself did not join in the fighting unless necessary. It was the same with Meng Hao, who despite having a paragon puppet and peak 6 essences battle prowess, also held back. Sea Dream and the other mountain and sea lords were the same. Unless facing powerful outsider experts, they merely observed the battle. They allowed the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm to do most of the fighting, to help them understand that now, the true war was only just beginning. Only by bathing in the blood of the enemy could the cultivators truly be qualified to grow into seasoned veterans. It was the same in the 8th and 9th mountains and seas. The outsiders had nowhere to run to. Upon their initial invasion, they had established 9 main camps in the 9 mountains and seas. Originally, they had been in the superior position in the fight, which made those camps like 9 sharp blades stabbing down into the mountain and sea realm, threatening to slice it into pieces. However, such troop placement was why they were now hovering on the brink of being exterminated completely. They were scattered, surrounded, with only the 6th and 7th mountains and seas being united and relatively free of mountain and sea cultivators. Those 2 locations had been their primary base of operations, and now they were their last point of refuge. Within the span of 7 days, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th mountains and seas all clinched victories, completely cutting off and surrounding the outsiders, killing nearly 80% of them. Blood spread out through the starry sky, and fierce fighting raged everywhere. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm fought with upright fearlessness. Su Qing shone with her own type of glory, and in the end, the 4th mountain and sea was where the greatest slaughter of outsiders was carried out. Next, they turned to help the cultivators in the 3rd mountain and sea. After that, they all joined forces in grandiose fashion. Under Su Qing's leadership, they marched toward the 5th mountain and sea, their target being the outsider encampment that stretched through the 6th and 7th mountains and seas. As for the 8th and 9th mountains and seas, after wiping out the outsiders on the field of battle, they joined forces and invaded the 7th mountain and sea. The fighting dragged on for several months. However, during those months, everything changed in a monumental and even spectacular way. Eventually, the day came in which the final battle began in the 6th and 7th mountains and seas. Meng Hao fought in that battle with his paragon puppet, leading to both grief and despair among the final resisting outsiders. The strongest among their number was Long Lindsay. The bitter agony which engulfed him was too difficult to put into words. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were like floodwaters smashing into the outsiders. With Paragon Sea Dream, the Paragon puppet, Xianxia, and Meng Hao himself leading the armies of cultivators into battle, the outsiders in the 7th and 6th mountains and seas were powerless to fight back. "Acknowledge allegiance or perish," said Meng Hao. As his voice echoed out across the battlefield, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm ceased attacking and instead began to echo his words. Their voices were grand and filled with unswerving determination. This was the spirit of a people on the rise. It was almost as if they were back in the Paragon immortal realm, in the position to look down on all creation. "Acknowledge allegiance or perish. Acknowledge allegiance or perish." The sound of their voices filled the mountain and sea realm, echoing about with intense pressure that caused the outsiders to tremble even more than before. Meng Hao did not want to completely exterminate the outsiders. That would be a waste. If they chose to acknowledge allegiance, then not only would the overall power of the mountain and sea realm not be reduced any further, but it would actually grow. That in turn was the true hope to be able to fight this war to the end. In response to Meng Hao's words, Paragon Sea Dream nodded slightly. Apparently, if Meng Hao hadn't spoken the words himself, she would have. As for Xianxia and the other mountain and sea lords, although each one had slightly different ideas about how to go about things, Meng Hao was a paramount figure in the mountain and sea realm, and they would listen to him. In fact, the incredible fleshly body power of the mountain and sea realm cultivators was thanks to Meng Hao, so of course they wouldn't go against his wishes. The outsiders didn't need much time to think. The most powerful of their number, the golden-armored Dao sovereign Long Lindsay, laughed bitterly and dispersed his cultivation base power. Then, bowing his head, he said, "I acknowledge allegiance." They really had no choice but to acknowledge allegiance. It was either that, or die as a people. When Long Lindsay's words echoed out across the battlefield and throughout the 7th and 6th mountains and seas, the outsiders heard them, and they sighed. They, too, dispersed their cultivation base power and bowed their heads. There were a few who refused, and they were quickly subdued and summarily executed. Their flowing blood bore witness to a grand victory on the part of the mountain and sea realm. It was a victory in which the first heaven collapsed, a paragon was enslaved, an imperial lord was killed, and of 2 Dao sovereigns, one was killed and the other surrendered. Nearly 70% of the invading force was killed. However, the mountain and sea realm had also paid a grievous price. Nearly 40% of the mountain and sea cultivators had been killed, most of them in the initial battles. If Meng Hao hadn't destroyed the first heaven and awakened the spirits of the cultivators, then enslaved their paragon before giving the outsiders any time to regroup, then even more of the mountain and sea cultivators would be dead. The first phase of the war was over. Although there were cheers of victory, massive pressure still weighed down on the shield created by the will of the mountains and seas. That shield separated them from the 32 heavens, and right now there seemed to be some enormous figure pushing down onto it. Everyone knew that the 32 heavens would be coming for them soon. The will of the mountains and seas could only hold them off for so long, and when they came, it would be with force that far exceeded that of the first heaven. This time, a far larger army would be coming against them. Could the mountain and sea realm prevail? That was the question all the cultivators in the mountain and sea realm were pondering. However, when they saw the enormous paragon puppet and Meng Hao on its head, their eyes shone with brilliant light. An ancient voice suddenly rang out into the minds and hearts of all of the mountain and sea realm cultivators. It was none other than the will of the mountain and sea realm itself. 3 months, at the most we have 3 months. At that time the 32 heavens will break through the barrier and descend upon us. This time it will not just be a single heaven. Next, the will of the mountain and sea realm asked a question which reverberated out in all directions. Should we activate mountain and sea siege mode? A look of surprise appeared on Meng Hao's face, and Xianxia suddenly looked up. However, Paragon Sea Dream turned to look at the 9th mountain and sea, and after a long moment spoke, her voice cool. "Activate siege mode. Mountain and sea lords, hear my orders. Immediately evacuate all life forms from the planets in your mountain and sea. Take them to the 9th mountain and sea, which will now serve as our command headquarters. Mountain and sea cultivators, return to your respective mountains and seas and await further orders. We will work together in concert with the Mountain and Sea Siege Mode to once again battle the 32 heavens. Mountain and Sea Siege Mode takes 1 month to activate. It was prepared by Paragon 9 seals for the express purpose of being used in this war. In Siege Mode, the entire mountain and sea realm will be transformed from a horizontal layout to a vertical one. All of the mountains and seas will be lined up on top of each other. The first mountain and sea will be our first line of defense. The second mountain and sea, our second. After 8 lines of defenses is the 9th mountain and sea. Fellow Taoists from all mountains and seas, we have 3 months. This war will determine the fate of our realm. As for me, I have only one thing left to say. Mountain and sea cultivators, fight to the death. After Paragon Sea Dream's words faded away, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were silent for a moment before their voices erupted out in unison. Mountain and sea cultivators, fight to the death. The sound of their voices shook the entire realm. Meng Hao took a deep breath, and within his eyes flickered the desire to do battle. He looked up at the starry sky and the void which existed beyond the barrier. That was where the 32 heavens were, and from that barrier emanated numerous ripples. The war really has begun. Chapter 1351. The First Heaven Acknowledges Allegiance. /expand. The entire mountain and sea realm was transforming. Although one might initially assume that such a huge transformation would happen slowly, it was actually visible to the naked eye. As such, one could well imagine how rapidly the transformation took place. The change was happening at a speed which all cultivators could perceive, and yet did not cause any sense of unease or disorientation. Originally, the mountain and sea realm was laid out in a horizontal line, from the first mountain and sea all the way to the 9th. It was like a giant laying there, with the sun and moon orbiting the entire realm. But now that giant was slowly standing up. The first mountain was rising high up into the starry sky, as was the first sea. Even as intense rumbling sounds echoed out, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm adhered to Paragon Sea Dream's orders. Under the leadership of the various mountain and sea lords, the occupants of the mortal worlds were all transported to the 9th mountain and sea. The mountain and sea realm buzzed with activity and was changing by the moment. There was no time for Su Qing to reunite with Meng Hao. She had put on an extraordinary display of her command of strategy and tactics, and as such, was whisked away by Paragon Sea Dream. She, along with Li Linger, were appointed by Sea Dream as the 2 great holy daughters of the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao sent the Paragon puppet high up into the starry sky, and tasked it with standing guard against any early incursions by the 32 heavens. At the same time, it sent Divine Will out through the entire mountain and sea realm, constantly exerting a slight pressure to cow any potential double-crossers. After all, despite the awakening of the spirit of the people, when it came to ultimate survival, there were some cultivators, and even some entire sects and clans, who weren't completely loyal. They didn't understand what it meant for all the eggs to be lost when the nest was overturned. They wanted to preserve their strength either to join everyone else in a comeback, or, if things looked bad, to surrender and attempt to somehow impress the 32 heavens. Of course, with the Paragon puppet there, such double-crossers didn't dare to take any action. Everyone in the entire mountain and sea realm was at work, busily preparing for war. Time was of the essence, and unless something unexpected happened, they had at most 3 months. Unexpectedly, Meng Hao experienced a rare situation in which he was left with nothing pertinent to do, so he strolled amidst the starry sky, watching the mountain and sea realm transform. The first mountain and sea led the rise as the mountain and sea realm slowly transformed from a horizontal layout to a vertical one. At the moment, that left it tilted at an angle. It's starting to look a bit unfamiliar, Meng Hao thought reticently. Finally, he sighed. He had known for a long time that war was coming. However, to him and all the other cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, that war had arrived too suddenly. It had started with the sudden outbreak of violence between the 7th and 8th mountains and seas. Then came the conflict between the 5th and 6th mountains and seas. After that was the decision to start the fighting the 33 heavens ahead of schedule. That decision had been the right one, and yet it didn't change the suddenness of it all. Meng Hao felt somewhat blank inside, even uncertain about the future. However, he couldn't give voice to such doubts. He couldn't allow anyone to see anything except staunch confidence and faith. Sadly, the truth of the matter was that he wasn't confident. Wherever he went, the cultivators who saw him clasped hands and bowed, looks of deep reverence in their eyes no matter which mountain and sea they came from. Meng Hao now symbolized the spirit of the mountain and sea realm cultivators. To many people, he also symbolized hope. Meng Hao put aside the pressure he felt, allowing a faint, self-assured smile to appear on his face. He would nod at people and then proceed along. He passed through the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th mountains and seas. Finally, he ended up in the 9th mountain and sea. This was his first time back since he had left, oh so long ago. Looking out at the 9th mountain and sea, his heart finally grew calm. However, there were still many things left for him to accomplish. Chu Yuyan's soul, he thought, pain stabbing at his heart. As he walked through the starry sky, there was really no other place that he wanted to go to other than home. Planet South Heaven. There were vast numbers of cultivators garrisoned on Planet South Heaven now. Because of their connection to Meng Hao, the Fang clan was well known not just in the 9th mountain and sea, but throughout the mountain and sea realm. Everyone was aware that Meng Hao was the crown prince of the Fang clan. Meng Hao's return caused a big stir. The entire Fang clan emerged to receive him, and a ceremony was held that surpassed the kind which would be held for even a clan chief. Only patriarchs received such treatment. Of course, it wasn't just the Fang clan that went out to receive Meng Hao. All of the sects and clans on planet South Heaven made appearances. Even the Emperor of the Great Tang could be seen. As soon as Meng Hao appeared outside of planet South Heaven, he saw tens of millions of cultivators lined up to welcome him. The looks on their faces were those of excitement, enthusiasm, and worship. In almost the same instant that he appeared, tens of millions of cultivators clasped hands and bowed deeply. We offer respectful greetings upon the return of the Crown Prince. Respectful greetings upon your return, Crown Prince. Crown Prince, the divine abilities you unleashed in the battle with the First Heaven are without parallel. Ever since Meng Hao destroyed the First Heaven and enslaved the outsider Paragon, the mountain and sea realm cultivators had come to view him as a crown prince, not just of the Fang clan, but of the entire mountain and sea realm. As their voices boomed out, Meng Hao looked over the group, and eventually his gaze came to fall on a separate group of people who stood behind everyone else, within the actual borders of the planet. There he saw his father, his mother, his sister, and the familiar faces of the chosen he had interacted with in the past. Meng Hao saw his father smiling, a smile of excitement and pride. He saw the kindness in his mother's face, as well as pride that only a mother could feel. Meng Hao looked back at the cultivators congregated outside of planet South Heaven, then clasped his hands and bowed deeply to them. What I did in the battle with the First Heaven is what any other mountain and sea cultivator would have done. I alone cannot determine the outcome of this war. If we want to win, we of the mountains and seas must fight together. Due to how powerful of a warrior he was in battle, Meng Hao didn't need to add any extra power to his voice. The words alone radiated passion and ardor. It was when the fighting broke out with the First Heaven that Meng Hao came to understand that he no longer had the luxury of thinking about only himself. He had a responsibility to bear, and that responsibility had already begun to weigh down on him. As his words echoed out, the tens of millions of cultivators outside of planet South Heaven once again clasped hands and bowed. Meng Hao proceeded forward, and they parted to create a path for him. Everyone watched as he strode forward and then entered planet South Heaven. As Meng Hao looked at his father and mother, and the various patriarchs, he suddenly felt as if the powerful spirit that had driven him in battle had somehow transformed into a deep exhaustion which threatened to overwhelm him. Home, the place where it was truly possible to relax. Meng Hao stepped up to his father and mother, then dropped to his knees and kowtowed. "Dad, Mom, I'm back." Countless cultivators looked on as Meng Li stepped forward and lifted Meng Hao to his feet. She looked at him for a moment, a flicker pain in her eyes, and then pulled him into a warm embrace. It was at that point that a huge cheer rose up from planet South Heaven. In the hearts of the mountain and sea cultivators, Meng Hao was a supreme being. However, in the 9th mountain and sea, and especially among the cultivators on planet South Heaven, he was something beyond that. He was their Meng Hao. Meng Hao was back. Planet South Heaven was shaken, as was the entire 9th mountain and sea. In the following half-month, countless cultivators came to visit planet South Heaven in the hopes of meeting Meng Hao. As for Meng Hao, he did his best to meet with as many as he could. Although he was exhausted and only wished to rest, he couldn't disappoint the cultivators of the 9th mountain and sea. When Meng Li realized what a strain it was putting on him, she erupted like a thunderclap and refused to let any visitors through the front gate. Fang Ziyufeng then began to stand in for Meng Hao to receive the guests, after which the crowds waned. At long last, Meng Hao had some personal time. He was able to spend some time with his mother and sister to truly enjoy the happiness of being with family. He did not meditate, nor did he practice cultivation. He didn't even leave the Fang clan to visit all the places he was familiar with on planet South Heaven. He stayed in the ancestral mansion, slowly allowing his heart to grow calm. He was only now coming to realize that the way the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm viewed him had changed. Fan Donger and all the other chosen he knew treated him differently. Occasionally, even his father would look at him with a reverence in his eyes that had never been there before. It left Meng Hao feeling somewhat bitter and even sad. And then there was his sister. When they were both young, she had promised that she would always protect him, and yet she had also changed. She loved him more than ever, but when she looked at him, he could see the awe in her eyes. 1. Fang Yu was first described as promising to protect Meng Hao in chapter 800, and those words were repeated in the following chapter. There almost wasn't a need to even mention Sun Hai. He had long since come to revere Meng Hao, but now he looked at him, not just with reverence but with fanatical zealotry. His mother was the only one who didn't seem to have changed. To her, it didn't matter what realm Meng Hao was in. Even if he was a paragon, he would always be her son. As he spent time with his family, he would sometimes look off into the distance, where he knew Su Qing was. Occasionally, he would ponder the matter of Chu Yuyan's soul. As for everyone else he knew, it wasn't that he didn't want to see them. Rather, in this moment of incredible crisis for the mountain and sea realm, he simply didn't have the mental energy to think about too many things at one time. Meng Hao got the feeling that he was changing. He was becoming quieter, and even spirit stones somehow didn't seem as important to him as they had in the past. Now, his thoughts were occupied more and more by the mountain and sea realm. If I could have my way, he thought, I would live in an era in which there was no war. Sighing, he felt more tired than ever. Another half-month passed. The mountain and sea realm siege mode was completely activated. The first mountain and sea was at the apex, with the first sea being in the highest position, followed by the first mountain. After that was the second sea and the second mountain. The entire mountain and sea realm had risen up like a giant that propped up heaven and earth. The sun and moon no longer orbited around the realm, but were motionless in guard positions on either side. Although that left certain parts of the mountain and sea realm in perpetual day and other parts in perpetual night, in this critical moment, that wasn't something that people worried about. At the same time, the vast numbers of mortals who lived in the mountain and sea realm had been transported to the ninth mountain and sea, which was now the most important place in the entire realm. In the instant that the mountain and sea realm siege mode was completely activated, the will of the mountain and sea realm spoke out into the minds of all cultivators, seemingly emotionless. My interference with the 32 heavens cannot be maintained for much longer. In a month and a half, they will come. Chapter 1353, I demand an explanation. The voice echoed out into the minds of all of the cultivators in the mountain and sea realm, and regardless of what they were doing, they stopped in place. The entire realm went silent. Soon, eyes began to shine with the desire to fight. The bewilderment and fear that had existed in those eyes were now replaced by a brilliant glow that reflected their spirits. Although they maintained their silence, they went back to whatever important tasks they had been working on with renewed haste. In accord with the requirements of Paragon Sea Dream and the Mountain and Sea Lords, the first mountain became the first line of defense. Furthermore, innumerable spell formations and restrictive spells were set up, until the entire place was like a gigantic restrictive spell formation. As for the denizens of the First Sea, they were also part of the war, and their survival was also on the line, so they held nothing back in their preparations. Each successive mountain and sea was an additional line of defense, after 8 of which was the nucleus, the headquarters of the entire mountain and sea realm. As the mountain and sea realm prepared for war, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in the Fang clan ancestral mansion. Another half-month passed before he chose to leave. There was someone he wished to see on planet South Heaven, as well as someone on the ninth mountain. The first person was Shui Dongliu. He had recently learned from his grandpa Meng that Shui Dongliu was the outsider he had known of for some time. After thinking about everything that had happened throughout the years and putting many pieces of the puzzle together, Meng Hao was increasingly certain that there was more to Shui Dongliu than met the eye. In fact, he even had the feeling that there was some monumental secret connected to Shui Dongliu, a secret that perhaps had something to do with the entire mountain and sea realm. Shui Dongliu used a single sentence to get my grandfather to become the lord of the 8th mountain and sea. Just, who exactly is he? According to what Grandma Ming said, my grandpa Fang isn't in the mountain and sea realm. Could it be that he's in? Meng Hao looked up. His gaze seemed to pass through all 8 lines of defense, out into the starry sky to the 32 heavens. During his more than 1 month on planet South Heaven, Meng Hao had frequently sent divine sense out to cover planet South Heaven in search of Shui Dongliu. He was certain that Shui Dongliu was there, somewhere. However, he hadn't been able to turn up even the slightest clue about his actual location. In the end, he sighed. Trusting in his own senses, but having no other recourse, he bid farewell to his parents and everyone else. Upon leaving, he hovered just outside of planet South Heaven and looked back down. "Don't want to see me, huh?" Meng Hao said coolly. In that same moment, back down on a high mountain peak on planet South Heaven, Shui Dongliu was looking up into the sky at Meng Hao. Apparently, he could see Meng Hao, but Meng Hao couldn't see him. Meng Hao hovered there for some time before his eyes glittered. He quickly blinked his left eye 9 times in a row, causing his view of the world to change and magnify. Soon, he could see all of the lands below in complete detail. Suddenly, he vanished. Shockingly, when he appeared, he was standing on the mountain peak directly in front of Shui Dongliu. Shui Dongliu didn't move a muscle, although a look of surprise could be seen in his eyes as he looked at Meng Hao. Except Meng Hao could see nothing in front of him at all. He got a very strange feeling from this mountain, as if it were somehow connected by karma to Shui Dongliu. After standing there silently for a moment, Meng Hao suddenly smiled in a relaxed fashion. Finally giving up on the idea of tracking down Shui Dongliu, he clasped hands and bowed deeply to the air in front of him. "Senior, since you don't wish to meet with me right now, then I'll take my leave. I will never forget the kindness you have shown me. I'm not sure what your plan is, Senior, but the mountain and sea realm is weak now, so please, don't play with fire and get burned." The words he spoke were icy, and a bitter coldness emanated from him. Even the paragon puppet up in the starry sky radiated a coldness that seemed to lock down onto that mountaintop. With that, Meng Hao looked up and made his way out into the void, paying the mountain no more heed. There, he transformed into a beam of light that left planet South Heaven. As he made his way off, Shui Dongliu continued to stand there, and a flicker of praise could be seen in his eyes. After a moment passed, he smiled. "So kid," he murmured, his smile deepening, "you've finally grown up. Grown some teeth too, I see. You know what it means to protect your home. Excellent, excellent. As for the mountain and sea realm, let's just say, I care about it more than you do, more than anyone." Outside of planet South Heaven, Meng Hao proceeded along through the starry sky. Throughout the 9th mountain and sea, cultivators were crafting planets and land masses in numerous locations, filling the starry sky. Gathered upon those planets and land masses were all of the mortals of the mountain and sea realm, and all of the bloodlines of all the cultivators. There was only one mountain and sea lord here, though, and that was Jade. Paragon Sea Dream had personally come to visit him and appoint him as guardian of the place. Meng Hao looked out at this vastly changed 9th mountain and sea, and eventually his gaze came to rest upon a certain mountain, the 9th mountain. Meng Hao wanted to meet a certain person and put an end to the karma which tied them together. That person was none other than Jade. Jade had interfered when Fang Ziyufeng stepped into the Tao and had attempted to possess Meng Hao in the 8th mountain and sea. Because of things such as these, the karma between them was varied and strong. Meng Hao proceeded through the starry sky toward the 9th mountain, then began to walk up the steps leading to the peak. Soon he was there, at the highest part of the mountain. He saw a celestial pond, within which was a sleeping Chuanwu turtle. Sitting cross-legged next to the pond was an old man in a violet robe. His eyes were unclouded and bright, and boundless karma was visible upon his person. In the instant in which Meng Hao saw him, he knew that this was the man he had come to see, Jade. He was a former subordinate of Lord Li, a powerful expert from the same era as the first-generation patriarch of the Fang clan. He was also the lord of the 9th mountain and sea. Jade was not alone. A young man and a young woman stood behind him. Meng Hao was unfamiliar with the man, having never seen him before, but could see that he had an extraordinary cultivation base in the mid-ancient realm. When he looked at Meng Hao, the awe in his eyes was evident, and although he was apparently trying to hold back from revealing it, Meng Hao could see it clearly. As soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on the young woman, he recognized her. It was Jai Yin, and as soon as she saw him, a complex look could be seen in her eyes, and her expression darkened. 1. Jai Yin was one of the many chosen who Meng Hao beat and stuffed into his bag of holding in the events of the immortal ancient Taoist Rite Temple arc. He fought Jai Yin in chapter 829. Later, someone disguised as her appeared when the Jai clan attempted to overthrow the Fang clan. Jai Tian's expression was the same as ever when he looked up at Meng Hao. It was almost as if he considered him to be an old friend. He smiled and in a casual tone said, "You've come." Meng Hao looked at Jai Tian, expression calm as he approached and stood before him. Then he looked down at the Xuanwu turtle in the pond water, and his eyes suddenly glittered. "So you can see it," Jai Tian said, smiling. "I knew there would be no way of hiding the truth. The only question is, will I be able to calm your anger, crown prince of the mountains and seas?" Meng Hao stood there silently, eyes flashing. What he saw was that there were innumerable powerful karma threads binding Jai Tian to the Xuanwu turtle, creating a connection between the two of them that vastly exceeded the connection between an ordinary mountain and sea lord and Xuanwu turtle. In fact, the life forces of Jai Tian and the Xuanwu turtle seemed to be bound together. Furthermore, it was not a situation in which Jai Tian was in the dominant position, with the Xuanwu turtle being bound to him. Instead, the Xuanwu turtle was dominant. If the Xuanwu turtle died, Jai Tian would perish. However, if Jai Tian died, it wouldn't have any negative effect on the Xuanwu turtle at all. In fact, if Jai Tian died, the Xuanwu turtle would be able to absorb the power of his cultivation base, and thus have an explosive increase in battle prowess. The way Meng Hao saw it was that this was an oath sworn by Jai Tian, that he would live or die with the ninth mountain and sea. Meng Hao examined the situation for a very long moment before turning to look Jai Tian in the eye. "Why have you done this?" Jai Tian looked back at Meng Hao and began to speak slowly, sounding as proud as the lord of the ninth mountain and sea should. "That is the wrong question to ask, Crown Prince. Let us make things clear. I have a grudge with your Fang clan. Furthermore, although there are many sects and clans in the ninth mountain and sea who venerate me, most of them fear me but don't respect me. However, after becoming the mountain and sea lord, I have committed no depraved acts of inhumanity. Perhaps I haven't led the ninth mountain and sea into riches and glory, but I haven't led it into decline either. As a matter of fact, many chosen have appeared here, one after another. I never had a single one of those chosen killed, no matter what sect or clan they come from, nor have I engaged in any wholesale slaughter. It's true that the Jai clan has grown large and powerful thanks to the immortality bestowal dais I created, which allowed many people to become false immortals by means of my name. However, in the end, I have done nothing to harm the ninth mountain and sea. If anything, I gave more people the hope and the chance to reach immortal ascension. As for the Fang clan, the only reason I ever targeted them was because of the old enmities that exist between our two clans. Despite that, from the very beginning until now, when you still haven't stepped into the Tao, I never made a move to attack you, with the exception of that one time in the 8th mountain and sea." Meng Hao thought for a moment, then responded in a cool voice, "Nice soliloquy, but it's not enough. I demand a complete explanation." Jai Yin couldn't hold back from jumping in. "Meng Hao, why you're pushing things too far? What the patriarch did to you and your father wasn't his true wish. He actually—" "That's enough," Jai Tian said, waving his hand to interrupt Jai Yin. He looked at Meng Hao and he seemed to have come to a decision. "I can give you that complete explanation, Crown Prince." With that, he rose to his feet and waved his hand, causing a rift to appear in front of him, which he immediately entered. Meng Hao glanced over at Jai Yin. Based on what she had just said, he already had an idea of what was going on. He strode forward into the rift, then appeared in a small dimension. The surroundings weren't very large. It was a sepulchre. "Crown Prince, the explanation I owe you lies in here," Jai Tian said, his voice hoarse. Meng Hao looked around and was instantly moved. Within the sepulchre were 8 coffins, none of which contained bones, only piles of skin. There was also a strong karmic power that caused Meng Hao's eyes to glitter. It only took a moment of extrapolation on his part to determine the general function of this place, although he couldn't determine the specific grand magic at play. "Clone possession," he said. "Crafting the perfect body. 8 possessions were like 8 lives, and from the look of it, Jai Dingyang was your 8th life. He wanted to possess me in order to become the 9th life. Therefore, what you want to tell me is that the divine magic you unleashed actually took control of you. The you that I encountered before wasn't really you. Furthermore, after cutting down Jai Dingyang, the magic was broken and you recovered control." Eyes glittering, he looked over at Jai Tian. Chapter 1354, The 32 Heavens Are Coming. Jai stood there for a while without responding. Then he sighed, looking around the sepulchre with mixed emotions. Qi Yunhai was the hero of an entire generation. His reincarnation magic worked for Qi Jiusi, but even though I obtained the same magical technique, I couldn't get it to work right. Meng Hao's mind reeled as he realized why this magical technique seemed so familiar. It was obviously the same legendary transmigration technique Qi Yunhai had mentioned. 1. You may remember the Taoist magic from the ancient demon immortal sect that allowed Qi Jiusi to continue to live down until the events of ISSTH. It was mentioned several times throughout that arc, the most relevant reference being in chapter 597. Crown Prince, does this explanation of mine meet with your satisfaction? Jai Tian asked slowly. Meng Hao waved his hand, causing the dimension they were in to shrink down until it was nothing more than a dot of light in the palm of his hand. Then, he and Jai Tian reappeared back out on the 9th mountain. Jai Tian had made things very simple. He knew that he had offended Meng Hao and the Fang clan far too deeply. That was in fact why he had connected his life force to the 9th mountain's Xuanwu turtle. Such an act clearly demonstrated how determined he was to fight for the mountains and seas. Then, he had actually handed over to Meng Hao the very pocket dimension which was inextricably bound to his own life. All of that showed that he was placing his life in Meng Hao's hands. If Meng Hao wanted to, he could easily use the pocket dimension to torture him endlessly, even kill him. After providing all of these things to Meng Hao, Jai Tian stood quietly off to the side, waiting for Meng Hao to make his decision. Meng Hao thought for a moment, then gave Jai Tian a profound look. If there were no war in the mountains and seas, then he would definitely kill Jai Tian on the spot. But now, a profound gleam flickered in his eyes as he turned, taking the pocket dimension with him as he left the 9th mountain. After Meng Hao left, Jai Tian seemed to age, and much of his energy drained away. After standing there bitterly for a moment, he sighed. He knew that he had just sidestepped a huge catastrophe. Before Meng Hao had destroyed the first heaven, he had felt confident in being able to personally prevent him from taking action. But after what happened with the first heaven, and after he enslaved the paragon, Jai Tian was filled with an unprecedented level of fear. At that point, he realized that all the preparations he had made would be useless in dealing with Meng Hao. The only way to have a shot at living was to place his life in Meng Hao's hands. Even then, he only had a sliver of a chance. After resolving matters with Jai Tian, Meng Hao proceeded along through the starry sky, observing the mountain and sea realm preparing for war. His heart grew calm, and his will to fight grew stronger. He was like a sword being sharpened, a sword that, when it was unsheathed, could sever the heavens. The preparations continued, and one by one, various projects were completed. The 8 lines of defense were set up, and the 9 seas were filled with astonishing restrictive spells. The mountain and sea cultivators were also organized into armies. Roughly 30% were sent to the first mountain and sea, with the rest being sent to the other mountains and seas, where they would wait to relieve troops on the battlefield or act as reinforcements. Ancient treasures from various sects and clans were distributed, and large numbers of cultivators were stationed on the sun and moon, which were in and of themselves precious treasures no weaker than paragons. During the battle with the first heaven, the will of the mountain and sea realm had been solely focused on maintaining the barrier against the other heavens. Therefore, the sun and the moon had not been used. Now that the barrier was breaking and the 32 heavens were coming, the sun and moon were ready to explode into battle. Ksitigarbha was stationed on the moon. Considering the level of his cultivation base, as well as the fact that he commanded the river of reincarnation, the sea of the yellow springs, as well as numerous Yama King palaces, the moon was the best place for him to unleash his peak power. Most of the power of the moon was focused, not on attacking, but defending. The brightest glow of all came from the sun. The person who had been appointed to that station was Meng Hao. As per Paragon Sea Dream's orders, Meng Hao was to take control of the sun, and would wield the mountain and sea realm's most deadly weapon. As for the Paragon puppet, Meng Hao sent it to the peak of the first mountain, where it had a perfect view of the first sea, and would be able to observe all of the battlefields which would make up the first line of defense. Conveniently, Meng Hao's incredible divine sense made it possible for him multitask, and thus personally control the incredible power of the Paragon puppet. To him, it was a perfectly suitable thing to do, although to anyone else it would be impossible. Everyone took everything very seriously, and soon, a powerful will to fight pervaded the entire mountain and sea realm. With the siege mode activated, the realm was like a razor-sharp sword. The most important aspect of the siege mode was that everything surrounding the entire mountain and sea realm was locked down by its will. The only way in or out was through the first sea and the first mountain. If the 32 heavens wanted to exterminate all life in the mountain and sea realm, then there was really only one way to do it. They could not resort to trickery like the first heaven had, and try to divide the mountain and sea realm. All cultivators in the mountains and seas, regardless of whether they wanted to or not, were ready for war. Some of them were thinking of themselves, but most were thinking of their clans and their sects. Perhaps few people were worried about the mountain and sea realm as a whole, but everyone had a clan or sect, as well as a family, and all of those existed within the mountain and sea realm. It was now only about 3 days until the 32 heavens were expected to break through the barrier. Everything was still and quiet, although the will to fight and the killing intent in the realm grew stronger and more pervasive. Meng Hao made his way through the starry sky until eventually he reached the sun. There were 100,000 cultivators posted there, arranged in both military and spell formations. The minimum cultivation level among those cultivators was the immortal realm, with about 30% being ancient realm experts. They did not come from one particular mountain and sea, but had been picked from all of them. These people all cultivated fire-type techniques, and with them present, the power of the sun would be even further increased. As soon as Meng Hao arrived, the 100,000 cultivators clasped hands and bowed deeply, fanatical gleams shining in their eyes. "Greetings, Crown Prince of the mountains and seas. We shall live and die with the mountains and seas. We are willing to give our lives and souls for the Crown Prince." The voices of 100,000 cultivators joined together into a powerful roar that echoed out, and within their eyes burned passion and an intense desire to do battle. Meng Hao looked at them, looked at the sun, and then clasped hands and bowed deeply. He made no speech, but instead stepped forward into the nucleus spell formation at the center of the sun, where he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Now that Meng Hao had arrived, all of the 100,000 cultivators sat down cross-legged. Meng Hao had previously believed this sun to be huge, definitely larger than a planet, and most likely as large as one of the mountains of the realm. But now he realized that actually, it wasn't very big. The reason it seemed so spectacular was because of the dazzling, majestic light which constantly shone off of it, and the intense heat which made it impossible for ordinary cultivators to even get near it. In fact, these 100,000 cultivators were wearing a special type of armor provided by Paragon Sea Dream, which allowed them to stay on the surface of the sun. As for Meng Hao, considering the current level of his fleshly body, he needed nothing of the sort. Numerous powerful spell formations could be seen which had apparently existed since time immemorial. As the 100,000 cultivators sat down cross-legged onto those spell formations, they merged into them, becoming part of the formations. Meng Hao, of course, sat down cross-legged at the spell formation in the very center. When he sent his divine sense out to cover the entire sun, he could sense a power there that could shake heaven and earth. It was not his first time sensing that power. Back in the windswept realm, he had used his drop of Paragon's blood to summon the light of this very sun, and the energy he had sensed at that time was the same as the energy he sensed now. With his divine sense unleashed, he could utilize the spell formation, and with a mere thought could merge into that power and even control it without the slightest interference. Meng Hao could also sense that deep within the recesses of the sun was the true precious treasure that this spell formation could unleash. "According to the legends," he murmured, "Paragon 9 Seals created the mountain and sea realm, and then used his 2 battle weapons to make the sun and moon. As for the sun, it focuses on battle, and the moon focuses on defense." With that, he looked over in the direction of the moon, which was on the opposite side of the mountain and sea realm. That was where Siddhigarbha was stationed, who Meng Hao had still not met in person. He was the most peerless expert in the mountain and sea realm, and he was tasked with using the moon to coordinate the defenses in battle. Meng Hao took a deep breath and looked away. Then he sent his divine sense throughout the sun, linking himself with the 100,000 cultivators. With that, he closed his eyes and began to wait. Time passed. 1 day, 2 days. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were itching to fight, and their killing intent shook heaven and earth. Everyone was now completely focused on the starry sky up above. By now, boundless ripples were spreading out through the starry sky, as well as crashing booms, all from the barrier created by the will of the mountains and seas. Something terrifying was bashing at that barrier, causing the starry sky to burn, and sending crevices snaking out. As the crevices grew wider, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm calmed their spirits. No one spoke. They stood there silently, waiting for the 32 heavens to attack. It was in that moment that Paragon Sea Dream's voice suddenly echoed out in Meng Hao's mind. Meng Hao. Meng Hao opened his eyes. The sun is extremely important and is in fact the key to the war. The sun must not be lost. The Taluo Red Thunder formation was one of the most powerful spell formations back in the days of the Paragon Immortal Realm. Paragon 9 Seals himself set up the formation, and having built up energy for tens upon tens of thousands of years, it can unleash supreme power. However, that power is limited. It can attack only 19 times at 100% strength. Eventually, the formation may break, and at that time, there is something you must remember. When it comes to the power of the sun, the spell formation is the first layer, the structure of the sun is the second layer, and the precious treasure in the nucleus is the third layer. Hold on for as long as you can. This war is going to go on for a long time. Paragon Sea Dream's voice echoed away into nothing. Meng Hao sat there silently. He didn't respond to her words, but his eyes shone with a sharp, brilliant light. As for his divine sense, he sent some of it out toward the peak of the first mountain where the Paragon puppet sat cross-legged. In the instant his divine sense poured into it, the Paragon puppet's eyes opened, and they glittered brightly as it slowly looked up. That was the moment in which a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering explosion rang out through the mountain and sea realm. Up above in the starry sky, visible to all, was a huge black scorpion claw, slashing down through the barrier up above. The barrier was ripped open, and rumbling sounds like thunder filled the starry sky of the entire mountain and sea realm. The rift which had been opened in the barrier was thousands of meters wide, and on the other side was an army of outsiders so large it was impossible to number. Countless eyes stared toward the mountains and seas, filled with greed and ruthlessness. The 32 heavens were coming. Expand. The rumbling was so intense that the heavenly bodies shook. The scorpion pincer retracted, then appeared once again in another area off to the side. More booms could be heard as a second huge rift was ripped open. Meng Hao watched silently, as did all of the other cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Their cold eyes were fixed on the starry sky up above as they awaited orders from Paragon Sea Dream. The gigantic scorpion pincer appeared again and again, and soon 10 rifts had been slashed open into the barrier in the starry sky. The strangest thing was that the 10 rifts did not connect at all. With every slash of the pincer, it seemed to grow weaker, until the final slash was delivered, whereupon a blast of energy surged out from the pincer. Everything trembled, and a huge shockwave surged out, although it seemed as if the source of that blast was actually beyond the barrier itself. After all, the scorpion pincer itself was more than 30,000 meters long, so it could only be imagined how gigantic the scorpion itself was. The aura emanating from the scorpion pincer spread out in all directions, and the pressure of a paragon superseded that of heaven and earth, dispersing everything in its path as it descended toward the mountain and sea realm, a will unto itself. Heathens of the Paragon Immortal Realm, henceforth all of ye, shall cease to exist. All immortals shall perish. All immortal bloodlines will be cut off. All memories will be expunged. Massive rumbling echoed out in concert with the voice, causing the mountains to shake and the seas to seethe. The minds of all the cultivators in the mountain and sea realm shook. That was the will of a paragon and not that of a 7 essences paragon. No, this was an 8 essences paragon. The mountains and seas were trembling. The lands shook and mountains were rocked as heaven and earth crumbled. The enormous scorpion pincer gradually retracted, as if the outsider paragon were temporarily incapable of actually descending into the mountains and seas, but first needed to widen the passageway before its true form could come. As the pincer pulled back through the huge 3,000-meter rift it had just opened, a sea of countless outsiders began to swarm through. Their eyes blazed with greed and a thirst for blood, and their laughter rang out in all directions. At the same time, countless outsiders began to fly out from the other rifts. The flesh and blood of immortals. I haven't savored that flavor for a long, long time. Immortals, huh? So this is the immortal world we've been suppressing for so many millennia. They actually managed to wipe out the first heaven. Hello attack. Screams that could twist the mind and heart echoed out as huge waves of outsiders poured out. For the most part, they looked completely different than ordinary cultivators. Some had scaly skin, Others had bone spurs protruding out all over their bodies. Some of them even looked like enormous crocodiles. There were outsiders that had human bodies but the heads of lions, and others with even more bizarre appearances. At a single glance, it was possible to tell that these beings were from outside the mountain and sea realm. When Meng Hao saw them pouring through the rifts, he frowned and wondered why the Paragon Immortal Realm had ever ruled over lower realms filled with outsiders such as these. It was at this point that Paragon Sea Dream's icy voice suddenly rang out in the minds of all mountain and sea cultivators. Fight! It was one word, but it was a word that called for a battle to the death. The resolve of the cultivators exploded like a whirlwind, and their hearts burned as if with fire. Rumbling could be heard as the cultivators on the first line of defense attacked, unleashing their most powerful divine abilities. The starry sky trembled as the might of millions of cultivators exploded out. Instantly, the starry sky was not black, but instead filled with a riot of dazzling colors. Countless divine abilities and magical techniques emanated scintillating colors, and were backed by the will and resolve of all the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. It was like an ocean of magic that surged with fatal power toward the outsiders. And this was just the first showdown. The fighting exploded in an instant. The outsiders also unleashed their most profound divine abilities, some of them moving so fast they were mere blurs. Others laughed maniacally as they grew to incredible sizes, using their natural armor-like flesh to fight back. Some even transformed into multiple clones. However, there were quite a few who were immediately cut down by the raging ocean of magic that blasted into them. This time, the mountain and sea realm had entered its siege mode, and the spirits of its cultivators burned with passion. They were completely and utterly prepared for battle. The ocean of magic swept over the outsiders, and even as it was destroyed, another salvo surged out from the first mountain and sea. As Meng Hao sat cross-legged in the sun, he refrained from attacking. This precious treasure of the mountain and sea realm could not be squandered casually. It was impossible to say exactly how long the war would last, and Meng Hao wanted to ensure that each attack he unleashed would inflict maximum damage on the invading 32 heavens. His paragon puppet was also waiting to attack. Currently, the only fighters on the field of battle were the cultivators from the first mountain and sea. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the initial advance of the outsiders was shoved back, making it impossible for them to descend into the mountain and sea realm. However, despite being sent spinning back by the ocean of magic, the number of outsiders was vast, and more of them poured out of the 10 rifts. Furthermore, additional rifts were now opening up. As the forces of the outsiders swelled in number, they were slowly able to push back against the ocean of magic unleashed by the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao frowned in thought. Then, the sun's spell formation began to flicker with light as he prepared to launch an attack. However, it was at this point that a cold snort echoed out from within the rift, and a new figure appeared. It was a lion-headed outsider, and as soon as he appeared, he exploded with the aura of an imperial lord. As he advanced, his aura transformed into an enormous circular shield of light. The shield of light grew larger and larger as he moved in front of all the others, until it was over 9,000 meters in diameter. This was what the outsider Imperial Lord used to defend against the ocean of magic. Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and without hesitation, he took action. The boundless light of the sun became the most dazzling light on the battlefield. A beam of light shot out, and if you looked closely, within that beam of light was a glowing arrow. The arrow pierced through the void to appear directly in front of the lion-headed Imperial Lord. His light shield instantly shattered, and the Imperial Lord's face fell. Pupils constricting, he shot backward. However, the arrow's speed hadn't been reduced in the slightest. Just as the arrow was about to slam into him, the lion-headed Imperial Lord threw his head back and roared. At the same time, his body rapidly expanded and changed shape into that of a golden lion. He then buted his head into the light shooting toward him from the sun. Intense, blistering light radiated out from the outsider Imperial Lord, and he let out a miserable shriek. Just when he was on the verge of being wiped out of existence, he suddenly spit a marionette out of his mouth. It was hard to tell whether the marionette was laughing or crying, and apparently it was taking the place of the outsider Imperial Lord's soul as it cracked into pieces. After the marionette was destroyed, the outsider Imperial Lord's body grew blurry and then vanished. When he reappeared near the border of one of the rifts, he was trembling and was clearly much weaker than before. Enraged, he turned to look in the direction of Meng Hao and the sun. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he snorted coldly. At the same time, the outsider Imperial Lord suddenly looked back in the direction of his destroyed marionette to find that the light arrow had reformed. It then shot forth at incredible speed, and before he could react, it stabbed into his forehead. A boom rang out, and a look of disbelief flashed across his face in the moment before he exploded. In the last moments before he died, the only thing that filled his mind was disbelief that he was dying after having just stepped foot onto the battlefield. Then, he was completely wiped out of existence. Countless cultivators within the mountain and sea realm saw this happen, and they were instantly enlivened. Upon the death of the lion-headed Imperial Lord, another astonishing stream of aura pierced out from within one of the rifts. It was a second Imperial Lord who moved so fast it was difficult to see him. Only when he stopped moving was it possible to see that his appearance was not humanoid. Instead, he was a huge ant, thousands of meters tall. He was pitch black and emanated a boundless black glow that fought back against the ocean of magic. Even as he looked over warily at Meng Hao, a third Imperial Lord appeared. Shockingly, this third Imperial Lord was not an outsider but a cultivator. He emanated profound ancientness and wore a long white robe. He was an old man who had apparently lived for countless years and emanated boundless cultivation-based ripples. As soon as he appeared, he looked down at the mountain and sea realm with a complex expression. Seemingly reminiscent, he finally snorted coldly, waving his right hand to cause a crimson flame phoenix to appear, fully 3,000 meters long. Instantly, it shot toward the ocean of magic. Two Imperial Lords were now attacking simultaneously, causing the ocean of magic to begin to vibrate. After a long moment, just when it seemed as if it couldn't sustain itself for any longer, the invading outsiders built up enough troops to unleash a magical ocean of their own. Meng Hao quickly prepared the sun's spell formation for a second attack. In the blink of an eye, another light arrow shot out, toward the white-robed Imperial Lord who was, clearly a cultivator who had originally come from in the mountain and sea realm. However, it was at this point that the starry sky trembled. Everything shook as a huge hand stretched out from one of the rifts. It was completely golden and covered with boundless fur that floated about elegantly. That hand stretched out with incredible speed to simply grab the second light arrow Meng Hao had just shot from the sun. The hand clenched down viciously, and the light arrow shattered. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He hadn't used the full power of the sun in his previous two attacks, only about 60 to 70%. Even still, the only type of person who could crush those arrows would be a paragon. Chapter 1355, Paragon Chuan Fang. Note from Deathblade. Interestingly, the paragon isn't actually named in the chapter, only the chapter title. Chapter 1356, Plot to Fragment the Heavens. Massive rumbling could be heard as the light arrow collapsed into pieces. The paragon's enormous hand stopped in place, then opened slowly, causing a drop of blood to drop down. That blood drop sizzled, and then exploded into a boundless sea covered with innumerable magical symbols. It descended like a millstone toward the ocean of magic unleashed by the huge army of mountain and sea cultivators. Meng Hao's pupils constricted in response. He definitely deserves to be a paragon. He clearly has copious experience in battle and is adept at changing tactics in the middle of fighting. He actually took the drop of blood that resulted from being struck by the light arrow and turned it into a powerful attack. There was no time for Meng Hao to stop what was happening. Frowning, he watched as the paragon's sea of blood shoved down onto the ocean of magic, instantly causing its light to fade wherever they connected. Simultaneously, the two Imperial Lords also attacked. Rumbling sounds could be heard as, for the first time, the mountain and sea realm's ocean of magic was suppressed and began to fade away. It was also at this point that the rifts in the starry sky were relentlessly ripped open wider and wider. Vast quantities of outsiders appeared. There were no less than 1,000,000 at this point, and their expressions were all fierce and vicious as they charged toward the first mountain and sea. The rifts only continued to open wider, and it was possible to see that even more outsiders were waiting beyond. They kept pouring through the openings without stop. Furthermore, behind all of those outsiders was a land mass. It was the second heaven. This second heaven was clearly larger than the first heaven, and beyond it, Meng Hao could see the third heaven, the fourth heaven, and the fifth heaven. Each of the 33 heavens was larger than the one before it, with the smallest being the first heaven and the largest heaven being the 33rd heaven. Rumbling could be heard as the second heaven battered the barrier, causing the rifts to grow larger and allowing more and more outsiders to enter the mountain and sea realm. From the look of it, the barrier wouldn't stay intact for very much longer. Meng Hao looked back toward the rifts, and his eyes flickered as he caught sight of the paragon who had just shattered his arrow. He was enormous and golden-colored with the head of a lion, the type of figure to be the subject of all attention. Golden light shimmered off of him, and Meng Hao could even sense that this lion-headed paragon possessed terrifying, world-destructive power. Sensing Meng Hao's gaze, the lion-headed paragon looked over, and his lightning-like eyes pierced through the void to land on the sun and Meng Hao. Voice cool, he said, "I am Chu Fang." Meng Hao snorted coldly as he sent his divine sense out to defend himself. Chu Fang's eyes glittered. Ignoring Meng Hao, he turned to face the paragon puppet which waited on the first mountain. His expression was mixed as he extended his hand and pointed toward the first mountain and sea. "Let the war of extermination begin." In response to his words, countless outsiders roared and charged toward the first mountain and sea, unleashing numerous magical techniques and divine abilities. The army that comprised the first line of defense for the mountain and sea realm was separated from the outsiders by the first sea, but they still fought back directly with various magics. However, the number of outsiders was vast, and more were pouring in by the moment. Their charge was relentless and awe-inspiring, and their advance drew them ever closer to the first sea. The seawater boiled and screamed, and began to vaporize into a mist, as if it were being eternally wiped away. Unexpectedly, Paragon Chu Fang stayed in place, an enigmatic smile on his face as he studied the mountain and sea realm. Then he shot up into the starry sky and stretched out both hands, as if he were going to grab hold of the expanse and rip it apart. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the barrier in the starry sky was ripped open even wider. Apparently, a tipping point had been reached. Massive rumbling could be heard as the barrier became completely inundated with cracks and tears, and then shattered into pieces like a mirror. As it did, everything that was up above was then revealed, all of the 32 heavens. Now that the barrier was down, the mountain and sea realm and the 32 heavens were connected. Both sides could look directly at each other. However, it was in that moment that all of the outsiders from the 32 heavens suddenly grew blurry and then faded away. Shockingly, they returned back to the land masses from whence they had come. This strange development caused Meng Hao's heart to begin to thump. Something strange was happening, and although he wasn't sure what it was, it seemed like something big was about to occur. Paragon Chu Fang's expression flickered with scorn as he looked coldly at the mountain and sea realm. "I have to admire your little plot, but I couldn't care less about it." In almost the exact same instant that Chu Fang's words echoed out, Meng Hao's heart trembled from the intense foreboding that was growing stronger by the moment. Suddenly, all of the shattered remnants of the barrier began to emit a droning sound as they spun around to form a huge tempest. Then, they began to rise up toward the 32 heavens. At the same time, Paragon Sea Dream's voice echoed out into the minds of the mountain and sea cultivators. "Attack!" Rumbling sounds echoed out, starting from the 9th mountain and sea, and then moving to the 8th, the 7th, and all the way to the first mountain and sea, as the mountain and sea cultivators unleashed explosive divine abilities and magical techniques. They rocketed up, then shot out from the first mountain and sea in an ocean of magic which exceeded the ferocity of the previous oceans by 10 times. It shot out toward the tempest, merging into it, and thus experiencing an exponential growth in size and power. That indescribably powerful force was heading directly toward the 32 heavens. This was the mountain and sea realm plot that Chu Fang had referred to, something that had been enacted by Paragon Sea Dream, but originally planned out by Paragon 9 Seals. It really was a plot. Although it wasn't possible to tell from the perspective of the mountain and sea realm itself, from the direction of the 33 heavens, it was easier to distinguish. The barrier which had been erected by the will of the mountain and sea realm, once shattered, would clearly be able to unleash a shocking attack. That shocking attack, that intense tempest, would combine all of the magical techniques of the mountain and sea realm cultivators to create a power similar to that of a paragon, which would then be used to strike at the second heaven. The massive tempest swept out to cover the second heaven, smashing its mountains and buildings, then moving on to batter the third heaven, the fourth heaven, and then the fifth heaven. As of this moment, Meng Hao had already unleashed 2 powerful attacks, leaving him with less than 16 left. However, he didn't hesitate to add the power of 1 more light arrow into the huge tempest, making it even more glorious than before. Meng Hao could also sense that there were likely more tricks hidden within the shattered barrier, so despite the sense of foreboding he had, he still chose to join in. The windstorm screamed, backed by the madness of the mountain and sea realm cultivators. by the explosive power of the will of the mountain and sea realm, as if they wanted to bash all of the 32 heavens to pieces. However, even as the windstorm blasted into the sixth heaven, and before it could charge on toward the seventh heaven, blinding light shone out to cover the land mass that was the seventh heaven. It then covered the eighth heaven above it, and the ninth and onward all the way to the 33rd heaven. Then, all of those heavens began to fade into blurriness. At the same time, a barrier appeared, cutting the connection between the sixth heaven and the seventh heaven. Simultaneously, a gigantic scorpion appeared in the vast expanse above the seventh heaven. It was blurry, but its eyes glittered with oppressive coldness as it stared down at the mountain and sea realm. The tactics of 9 seals, carried out by Sea Dream, our 33 heavens have no choice but to face the power of your plot. As it turns out, that power of extermination is as terrifying as ever. However, tens upon tens of thousands of years have passed. We are different than we used to be. In the past, you might have been able to blast through all 33 heavens to open up a path for the mountain and sea realm to flee. But now, you shall be stopped at the sixth heaven. That mountain and sea siege mode might seem like it is intended to converge power for defense, but there is no question that its shape is that of an arrow. In all likelihood, Paragon 9 Seals planned this out all those tens of thousands of years ago. His plan for the final battle was actually to open a corridor to make your getaway. I wonder how many cultivators of the mountain and sea realm actually knew about this little plan. Based on what I know of your personality, Sea Dream, my guess is that you didn't tell anyone. The scorpion's laughter rang out through the mountain and sea realm as it slowly disappeared. His words were filled with sinister malevolence, and when they entered the ears of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, their hearts trembled with shock. Not even Meng Hao had been aware that Sea Dream would do something like this. Although he could disregard the allegation of the scorpion-shaped paragon if he wanted to, after some thought, he realized that what he had said didn't seem like a complete fabrication. If Meng Hao was affected in such a way, then it could only be imagined how the rest of the mountain and sea cultivators felt. They couldn't help but suddenly lose a bit of confidence regarding the war. After all, even their paragon wanted to escape, not fight to the death. The sensation of hope they had felt after Meng Hao destroyed the first heaven and enslaved a paragon suddenly faded a bit thanks to the words of the scorpion-shaped paragon. Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and his heart sank. He knew that cultivators who could reach the level of paragon were by no means weak and would also be profound schemers. As the scorpion-shaped paragon disappeared, and the 7th through 33rd heavens faded into a state of invisibility, the land masses of the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd heavens all began to descend. Although they were broken and in ruins, the outsiders on them clearly had ways to defend from the attack just now. All of them boiled forth, tens of millions of them, backed by their land masses as they charged in attack. There were also numerous black cubes which spread out from the 5 land masses, no less than 1,000,000 of them. At this point, Paragon Sea Dream's cold voice echoed out into the starry skies. What a pack of lies! You think a measly scorpion tribe priest like yourself can understand the ways and means of Paragon 9 Seals? Cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, the 7th heaven and all the other heavens have unleashed their heaven-concealing sorcery. For the next year, they will be incapable of emerging from their current state, nor will they be able to fight us. They will only be able to watch. They have abandoned the 2nd through 6th heavens. Their armies are alone. Outsider cultivators of the lower realms, did you know that? Did you know that you have been forsaken? /expand. It didn't matter whether or not Paragon Sea Dream really had planned to flee with the mountain and sea realm, or whether or not she felt the war to be hopeless. As of this moment, her echoing words not only solidified the hearts of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, it was also a rhetorical counterpunch that caused the outsiders who remained behind in the 2nd through 6th heavens to turn very grim-faced. Meng Hao breathed a sigh of relief, then looked toward the 9th mountain with a complex expression. Deep in his heart, he was convinced that Paragon Sea Dream really had intended to lead the mountain and sea realm into flight. However, now was not the time to ponder the matter. He settled his thoughts and then focused completely on the spell formation, causing brilliant sunlight to shine out into the starry sky. Meanwhile, as if giving their reply to Sea Dream's words, the millions of black cubes floating in the starry sky suddenly erupted with boundless lightning, which then lashed downward and bombarded the mountain and sea realm's first line of defense. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But in addition, the surging energy of a paragon also erupted out from the 6th heaven. A hoarse voice could be heard, filled with seemingly infinite pride. still as slippery with words as ever, fellow Taoist sea dream. How amusing. The 33 heavens originally had 5 powerful paragons. Of those, one had been enslaved by Meng Hao. That left 4, and now 2 were present to fight. The words spoken by this paragon instantly filled the outsiders with confidence. After all, if the 32 heavens sent 2 paragons to support them, then how could it be, as Sea Dream said, that they had been abandoned? Their fighting spirits soared. Roaring, millions upon millions of outsiders charged toward the first sea, whose waters boiled and bubbled as countless restrictive spells exploded out. The first mountain and sea was the first line of defense, and the cultivators there had no time to think or ponder. They could only begin to fight. Millions of cultivators charged forth in attack. Countless scintillating beams of light shot through the first sea, joining the power of the restrictive spells and spell formations to unleash carnage upon the outsiders. The first sea seethed as innumerable outsiders poured into the battle. In the blink of an eye, miserable shrieks and cries filled the air, and countless grievous injuries and even deaths occurred. The first sea almost instantly turned crimson, making the entire sea look like a sea of blood. As for the paragon who had just spoken out from the 6th heaven, he did not appear in body. Clearly, his only goal had been to put pressure on the mountain and sea realm and to calm the outsiders. Even more so, he wanted to buy time. Time was needed for the 7th through 33rd heavens to emerge from the special state created by the magic they had used to evade the destructive tempest. As for the outsider imperial lords, their number had increased from 4 to 6, and they were making a grand display in battle. Out in the starry sky, Xianfang's eyes glittered as he looked over at the 6 imperial lords, then pointed in the direction of the sun. All of you, however, before he could finish speaking, his expression flickered. Not good. In that same instant, a glowing shield exploded out from the moon. Ksitigarbha was using all the power he could unleash to utilize the moon's spell formation power. The moon was devoted to defense, and now it created a shield that covered the mountain and sea realm, including the first sea. That shield locked down the mountain and sea realm, and at the same time, cut off all of the outsiders who were within the first sea from the others. It was as if the outsiders' huge army had suddenly been cut apart. One portion was isolated in the first sea, with the majority of the army being stuck outside. At the same time, Meng Hao sent divine will into the paragon puppet that was waiting atop the first mountain. Suddenly, it looked up, its eyes flashing. The puppet's face was expressionless, but when Xianfang saw it, his face fell. The puppet rose to its feet, the pressure of a paragon exploding out from the first mountain to fill the first sea. Then, it took a step forward. Igu, what are you doing? Xianfang roared from the other side of the shield. He took a step toward the shield, clenched his hand into a fist, and struck out. The entire shield shook as though it might break at any moment. However, Ksitigarbha's eyes gleamed viciously, and blood oozed out of the corners of the mouths of the 100,000 cultivators under his command. As a result, the shield stabilized and showed no further signs of being breached. Xianfang roared with fury as he battered the shield again, but it did no good. He stared viciously at Meng Hao's paragon puppet as it took a step forward, then unleashed a fist strike toward the first sea. That fist strike contained paragon power that could shake the heavens. The entire first sea sank down, and the mountain and sea cultivators were pushed back by an enormous force. In contrast, the outsiders' faces flickered with shock and despair. No. That's Paragon Igu. How could this be possible? Paragon Igu has turned traitor. Massive rumbling echoed out as the fist strike descended. The outsiders began to cough up blood, and cracking sounds mixed with miserable shrieks could be heard as their bodies began to fall to pieces. After the fist strike landed, a powerful shockwave surged out in all directions like a massive tempest. As it passed over the outsiders in the first sea, their bodies were flayed into masses of blood and gore. Their flesh became ash, and their bones were shattered into fragments, leaving nothing behind. Their magical items, their bags of holding, everything about them was completely destroyed, until nothing was left behind but wisps of smoke. However, the blood that filled the first sea remained behind. Not a bit of it faded away, and in fact, it grew thicker, until the first sea emanated a stench that struck fear into the hearts of the outsiders on the other side of the shield. One single punch exterminated all of the enemy forces in the first sea. The power of a paragon, once unleashed, could exterminate heaven and earth. The paragon puppet slowly looked up, and its eyes were clearly not that of Igu, but Meng Hao. The icy madness therein, freezing killing intent which stabbed out of the mountain and sea realm's shield toward Xianfang. Xianfang shivered, and his face darkened, but the killing intent in his own eyes burned brighter than ever as he then turned to look in the direction of the sun and Meng Hao. As long as this kid remains alive, he thought, this war will be 10 times as hard to win. After a moment, he looked away. Without speaking another word, he turned his attention back to the shield. He was confident that he would be able to break it open, but he also knew that even if he did, his army wouldn't be willing to casually step into the first sea. And yet, if he didn't break the stalemate, then despite being able to buy some time, the morale of the troops would be significantly damaged. Furthermore, that would also give time for the mountain and sea realm to make further preparations. Xianfang's eyes glittered. We can't let them dictate the tide of battle. To break this stalemate I need to throw out some bait. An imperial lord wouldn't be enough. Only by offering myself up as bait can I force the mountain and sea realm into making a move, whatever it is. After a moment of silence, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm suddenly began to cheer, and their excitement grew. At the same time, the shield began to fade away. As it did, the outsiders stared at the bloody first sea, and just as Xianfang had predicted, none of them dared to enter it. Although they clearly outnumbered the mountain and sea realm cultivators, they were the scared ones. None of them dared to enter, but Xianfang did. He shot through the vanishing shield at high speed, and in that same moment, Xianxia suddenly rose to his feet from where he sat inside the moon. He actually dares to enter, he thought, eyes shining with a strange light. However, he hesitated. That hesitation came as he considered whether or not to activate the shield again, trapping the outsider paragon inside, and then using the power of the mountains and seas to kill him. Accomplishing that could potentially end the battle much earlier. It wasn't just Xianxia who was hesitating. Sea Dream was frowning, and as for the rest of the outsider army, they were stunned. However, some of the outsiders were already beginning to roar and charge forth to fight. The 6 imperial lords were also shaken. The only person who seemed unfazed was the other paragon in the 6th heaven. Meng Hao began to breathe heavily. The decisiveness being shown by Xianfang caused an icy coldness to glitter in his eyes. Offering himself up as bait, there was no time for lengthy consideration. Xianfang shot into the first sea and appeared directly in front of the paragon puppet. As he closed in, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing the surrounding sea of blood to solidify, almost as if it were being frozen by indescribable coldness. Seal, Sea Dream barked in response, countering his move. Her eyes flickered with a fierce gleam. There was really no choice in the matter. If Xianfang was brave enough to offer himself up as bait, and the mountain and sea realm was too cowardly to bite, then how could they possibly continue to fight the war? Sea Dream normally planned things out carefully, but this situation was different. Even as Sea Dream's voice continued to echo out, and before she could act on her decision, the light of the sun around Meng Hao blazed brightly. He had made his choice too, which was to take the bait. Xianxia took a deep breath as his cultivation base surged with power. The river of reincarnation appeared, along with the sea of the yellow springs and the numerous underworld palaces. The 100,000 cultivators on the moon all erupted with cultivation base power, pouring it into the spell formation, which Xianxia then manipulated, causing the shield to spring up, covering the mountain and sea realm, completely trapping Paragon Xianfang. In the same moment that the shield appeared, the sun blazed with intense light as an attack was unleashed. An arrow of light shot through the starry sky, and at the same time, Paragon Sea Dream suddenly shot to her feet in the 9th mountain, then took a step forward to appear on the battlefield. Rumbling could be heard as Meng Hao's paragon puppet began to fight with Xianfang. Even as the spectacular battle began to play out, the sunlight arrow was closing in. Unexpectedly, Xianfang didn't attempt to evade the arrow. In fact, he didn't even pay any heed to Paragon Sea Dream. Do you people really think I threw myself out as bait to get revenge for the millions of my fellow clan members who have died already? Or perhaps because of this ego puppet? Oh no, no, I came here. He suddenly looked toward the sun and smiled coldly, for you. Laughing, he reached up and grabbed the light arrow, crushing it with his hand. A massive boom rang out and blood oozed out of his mouth as he seemed to be on the verge of exploding. However, a strange light then began to flicker within his eyes. Tao of Time, return to the origin, trace this light back and converge my true form. Even as he spoke, Xianfang vanished. When he reappeared, he was on the sun, a black pearl in his hand, which he then slammed downward. Chapter 1357, throw myself out as bait. Chapter 1358, Battling Paragon Xianfang. It was as if he had searched for the origin of the arrow, followed the light arrow back, used some incomprehensible divine ability to travel back in time by several breaths. Furthermore, Paragon Xianfang himself had traveled back in time. The injuries that had just been inflicted on him by the light arrow suddenly faded away as he appeared on the surface of the sun. Massive rumbling sounds could be heard, and the whole sun began to vibrate. The sudden turn of events caused Meng Hao's eyes to narrow. The essence of time. Meng Hao had fought many people in his life, and although he might not have as much experience as Xianfang, he came close. Therefore, it was without the slightest hesitation that he reacted. In fact, his physical reaction was even faster than his mental reaction, as his cultivation base exploded with power, taking the power of the spell formation formed by the 100,000 cultivators and sending a vicious attack out. That attack contained the full power of the sun, becoming a beam of light that shot, not directly toward Xianfang, but toward the black pearl. That pearl gave Meng Hao a very bad feeling. The golden light which emanated off of Paragon Xianfang had faded some. Clearly, using the heaven-defying timeshift magic was not something he could easily do. In fact, most likely, he wouldn't be able to unleash the same magic again anytime soon. In that respect, it was similar to Meng Hao's essence of space. In any case, Paragon Xianfang's sudden appearance on the sun not only caused Meng Hao's eyes to widen. Paragon Sea Dream was clearly shocked. Paragon Sea Dream instantly drew upon her full power to teleport over to the region of the sun. Meng Hao also used divine will to call his Paragon puppet over, help extricate himself from the danger. Amidst rumbling sounds, brilliant light shot toward the pearl that Paragon Xianfang was slamming toward the surface of the sun with such speed that it seemed that it would surely be able to intercept the pearl before its impact. Xianfang snorted coldly, then suddenly let go of the black pearl, allowing the light of the sun to slam into it. A huge boom then echoed out as the pearl was completely shattered. As that happened, black mist spread out, which Meng Hao could instantly tell was filled with some sort of incredible sealing power. Thankfully, it had been destroyed before being fully unleashed. Had it been used, even a paragon would have been hard-pressed to undo the sealing effect. Clearly, the pearl had been a precious treasure that only a paragon could create. As soon as the black pearl shattered, Paragon Xianfang suddenly flickered into motion. In the blink of an eye, he was off in the distance. However, he was still on the surface of the sun, and shockingly, another black pearl could be seen in his hand. A vicious grin could be seen on his face as he completely ignored the incoming Sea Dream and Paragon puppet. "When I attack, I plan things meticulously," he said coolly. "Things rarely go awry when I make a move." With that, he viciously threw the black pearl down toward the surface of the sun. "Why does he insist on slamming that thing into the sun?" thought Meng Hao, frowning. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head, and at the same time the lightning cauldron appeared. Electricity danced as Meng Hao teleported out of the spell formation. Xianfang's jaw dropped as, in the blink of an eye, formed displacement transposition caused him to switch places with Meng Hao. Meng Hao waved his hand, and just as the black pearl was about to slam into the surface of the sun, he scooped it up. As soon as he touched it, he understood. He doesn't want to seal this moment in time, and he doesn't want to use the pearl to kill me. He wants to seal the sun. With that, he looked up, and his pupils constricted as he realized that Paragon Xianfang had produced a third black pearl. This time, Xianfang didn't speak. In almost the same instant that Meng Hao laid eyes on him, he didn't throw the pearl down but simply crushed it. As the pearl was crushed, thick black mist exploded out, instantly swirling out to cover the entire sun, creating something like a unique domain. It was at this point that Meng Hao's Paragon puppet closed in and unleashed a fist strike upon the black mist. However, the power of that strike disappeared as quickly as a stone ox thrown into the ocean. Furthermore, there was no reaction whatsoever from the mist. As for Paragon Sea Dream, as soon as she was close enough, she waved her finger, sending Paragon power exploding out. However, it did nothing to the mist except cause it to shudder and loosen slightly. "Those are gloom pearls." An extremely unsightly expression appeared on Sea Dream's face. Gloom pearls were not something from the 33 heavens. Back when the Paragon Immortal realm faced complete catastrophe, one of the two major enemy forces created them with the express purpose of ensnaring powerful experts of the immortal world. Once their power was unleashed, it couldn't easily be dispelled. At the very least, it could trap everything inside of it for a quarter of an hour. During that quarter hour, Whatever was inside the mist was completely cut off from the rest of the world. Even as Sea Dream's face flickered, Paragon Chuan Fang was within the mist, eyes flickering with icy killing intent. Although he initially appeared to be going after the Paragon puppet, in the blink of an eye, he changed his target to Meng Hao. But then, just when everyone thought he was actually trying to kill Meng Hao, he unleashed a gloom pearl to lock down the sun. He had even prepared 3 pearls, all to ensure that the power of the sun could not be unleashed. That would remove one of the major obstacles to the invading army. However, just when people thought they knew what Xuan Fang was trying to do, he suddenly changed tactics again. Instead of trying to keep the sun sealed, he targeted Meng Hao. The truth was that few people would be able to guess exactly what his goals were. Right now, the sun was cut off because of the mist. Sea Dream and the Paragon puppet were on the outside, trying to batter their way in, trying to undo the seal. Meanwhile, Meng Hao was inside, facing incredible danger. "I have a quarter of an hour to kill you, and that's all I need." Xuan Fang laughed loudly, erupting with the cultivation base power of a paragon as he took a step forward toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face darkened. Xuan Fang was turning into a real headache. Not only was his cultivation base incredibly powerful, his ability to scheme ran deep and profound. He was proving much more difficult to deal with than Igu. Even as Xuan Fang bore down on him, Meng Hao backed up, sending out divine will to gather the power of the spell formation. Rumbling sounds could be heard as brilliant light exploded out, transforming into a light arrow that shot toward Xuan Fang. Xuan Fang roared and performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing an enormous golden lion to appear behind him. The lion rapidly grew in size, covering Xuan Fang and taking the hit of the arrow instead of him. A boom rang out as the light arrow pierced into the image of the lion, which distorted, and then, before it could even roar, shattered into pieces. The light arrow, despite dimming somewhat, continued to stab toward Xuan Fang, who then reached out and grabbed it. As he crushed his hand down, the light arrow collapsed, and Xuan Fang backed up a few steps, his face pale and yet covered with an expression of scorn. "The treasures passed down by 9 seals are truly powerful. Unfortunately, you can only unleash a limited bit of its power. Perhaps if you struck me over and over again in quick succession, you would have a chance to kill me. However, you can only unleash the power with the help of that spell formation and those 100,000 cultivators which maintain it." What a joke. Besides, for the next 10 breaths of time at the minimum, you will not be able to unleash the power of this sun. Even as he spoke, Xuan Fang launched himself toward Meng Hao, golden light flickering around him as he clenched his fist and punched out. "Your fleshly body has the signs of fleshly body cultivation. Let's see how well you cultivated it." The fist strike was powerful enough to shatter mountains and crush the earth. The sun trembled, and boundless golden light radiated out as a gigantic lion appeared within the fist strike, roaring as it charged toward Meng Hao. Paragon power dispelled the natural laws in the area, causing the 100,000 cultivators to cough up mouthfuls of blood. There were even some who exploded into showers of blood and gore. Meng Hao's cultivation base suddenly teetered unstably, and he staggered backward. At the same time, Paragon Sea Dream's voice echoed urgently from beyond the mist, sounding almost as if it were coming from a different time and space. "Meng Hao, just hold on for a quarter of an hour. That's the longest it will take us to break this seal." The danger was intense, leaving Meng Hao's heart pounding. He might be as powerful as the peak of 6 essences, capable of fighting with imperial lords. However, the difference between that and a paragon was too vast. He was currently trapped with nowhere to flee and no choice but to fight to the death. In this critical juncture, Meng Hao dismissed all notions of coming up with a clever idea. Instead, his mind thrummed with the desire to fight. "A quarter hour," he thought, eyes flickering with killing intent. Then he sent his divine sense rocketing toward Xuan Fang in a vicious attack. Instead of falling back, he fought back against the pressure, taking a step forward and unleashing his own fist strike. Life extermination. Everything shook violently, and a tempest sprang out in all directions as Meng Hao's fist strike slammed into Paragon Xuan Fang's. A huge boom could be heard, and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth. However, his expression was extremely vicious as he took another step forward and unleashed a second fist strike. Bedevilment fist. No survival without bedevilment. Meng Hao laughed uproariously. Massive energy was unleashed by the fist strike, causing a deafening boom to ring out. Even Paragon Xuan Fang was taken aback. Meng Hao coughed up more blood, and cracking sounds could be heard coming from within him. He might have a Tao sovereign fleshly body, but Qiu Fang was a paragon, with an even stronger fleshly body, one that vastly exceeded Meng Hao's. You really want to die? Qiu Fang laughed coldly. Rotating his cultivation base, he caused intense pressure to spread out. The golden lion roared, completely suppressing Meng Hao's bedevilment fist, and then appearing directly in front of Meng Hao himself. It was at this point that Meng Hao's eyes shone with a brilliant light as he unleashed a third fist strike. It was none other than the God-slaying fist. Chapter 1359, Oh so devious. Merge my will with that of the heavens. My fist arouses the sun, becoming a fist of light. As of that moment, Meng Hao's will converged in the form of the God-slaying fist. Advancing courageously and with complete determination, he unleashed the powerful blow. When it slammed into Paragon Qiu Fang's fist, massive booms rang out. A tremor ran through Meng Hao, and his right arm distorted. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and he was sent tumbling backward as though he had been struck by a powerful blast. However, at the same time, Qiu Fang's eyes flickered with astonishment. Although he appeared to have been unfazed, the 5 fingers of his right hand were tingling in pain, and he couldn't even stretch them out. An injury like this wasn't something that would cause him to cough up blood, and yet his finger bones were crushed, and the other bones in his arm were fractured. However, the intense pain only caused the killing intent in Qiu Fang's eyes to deepen. Once again, he closed in on Meng Hao. Wish you could get away, Qiu Fang chuckled. However, even as he closed in, Meng Hao suddenly stopped in place and looked up, his eyes gleaming with ferocity as his Green Emperor's eternal incantation operated at full speed. The thought never crossed my mind, he replied icily. Azure light shone out as he transformed into an azure rock, which then shot toward Qiu Fang at high speed. A piercing cry rang out, and at the same time, numerous mountains descended, along with the Paragon Bridge, which erupted with intense power. Rumbling could be heard as Paragon Qiu Fang laughed coldly, choosing not to evade, but instead to step forward and make a grasping motion. Immediately, golden light sprang into being in front of him, within which flickered innumerable magical symbols. A spell formation was formed, which radiated the power of the stars, causing the 5 elements to be thrown into chaos and strange lights to flicker. The spell formation immediately shot toward Meng Hao, causing his mountains to shatter and destroying his azure rock form. Azure light scattered, and Meng Hao's human form emerged, looking completely bedraggled. His chest was a mass of blood and gore, and even organs were visible. Without the incredible effort of the Green Emperor's eternal incantation, which constantly healed him, Meng Hao would already be dead. Even with it, he was clearly in an extremely precarious situation. Now this is a paragon, he thought, eyes flickering with an unyielding gleam. His fight with Igu hadn't been nearly as intense as this. Right now he was trapped and had no other choice but to face the terrifying might of a paragon. And this was just a 7 essences paragon. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the golden spell formation bore down on Meng Hao. He threw his head back and roared, causing brilliant light to shine off of the Paragon Bridge as it fought back. The pressure from the Paragon Bridge caused the golden spell formation to tremble and finally break into pieces. The Paragon Bridge shuddered, but continued to crush downward toward Qiu Fang. Qiu Fang's eyes widened. He suddenly looked more closely at the Paragon Bridge and his expression flickered. Backing up, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, then placed his finger onto his forehead. Instantly, golden light erupted from the top of his head, transforming into a golden lion. An expression of avarice appeared on Qiu Fang's face, and he began to laugh. I can't believe it's that bridge. I'll take it. The golden lion was a sliver of Qiu Fang's psyche, and as it flew out, it began to swirl around the Paragon Bridge, attempting to use the power of a paragon to sever the connection between it and Meng Hao. Meng Hao had no time to try to stabilize the connection. It was a critical moment of deadly crisis, but Meng Hao was confident that as long as he himself didn't die, the bridge couldn't be taken away from him. Even as Qiu Fang was backing up, Meng Hao suddenly teleported back into the spell formation in the middle of the sun. There, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing scintillating light to swirl out from the sun. Shockingly, he had already been fighting with Paragon Qiu Fang for more than 10 breaths of time, which meant that the sunlight arrow could once again be unleashed. Rumbling sounds could be heard as intense light shot toward Paragon Qiu Fang. Because of how close he was, that light landed on him almost instantly. It stabbed into his forehead, causing Qiu Fang to shudder and then cough up a mouthful of blood. His energy waned slightly, and although he wasn't dead, a grievous wound could be seen on his forehead, which immediately began to heal up. It only took a moment of analysis on Meng Hao's part to come to the conclusion that Xianxia hadn't come out unharmed. He was clearly using some sort of secret magic to suppress the harmfulness of the wound. In the future, he might suffer an incredible backlash because of that. But at the moment, his battle prowess was not decreased at all because of the wound. Damn it, thought Meng Hao, his face darkening. At the same time, Xianxia gave a sinister laugh and charged toward Meng Hao. As he closed in, he waved his hand, causing a golden sea to spread out in all directions, then bashed toward Meng Hao within the spell formation. Don't even mention that quarter hour. You won't even last long enough to fire another of those light arrows. Paragon Sea Dream was outside of the mist, her face pale as she realized that Xianxia was completely intent on killing Meng Hao. Even she didn't believe that Meng Hao could last an entire quarter of an hour against him. It was actually just as Xianxia had said. Meng Hao couldn't hold out for that long, even if he sacrificed the 100,000 cultivators to buy time. Xianxia, Sea Dream roared, battering anxiously at the mist. At the same time, the divine sense which Meng Hao had sent to drive the ego puppet was slowly fading. The puppet was already becoming sluggish, and it wouldn't be long before the divine sense completely faded away. Then the puppet would lose most of its battle prowess and be left only with its basic instincts. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. However, the outsider army on the other side of the shield was getting stirred up and was now trying to break through. At the same time, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were completely shocked by what was happening with the sun. Even more relevant was that, in the sixth heaven outside of the mountain and sea realm, a cold laugh rang out, which belonged to none other than the second paragon. If he didn't understand how to take advantage of the opportunity Paragon Xianxia had created, then he didn't deserve to be a paragon himself. As he stepped out from the sixth heaven into the starry sky, no one could see what he looked like, as he was covered by a rippling field of darkness. He looked coldly out at the mountain and sea realm, and the shield, then at the battlefield that was the sun. His lips twisted into a cold smile, and a merciless cruelty radiated out from him. He did not speak, but instead raised his right hand and performed an incantation gesture. Instantly, the rippling darkness around him twisted and distorted, then began to expand outward. Clearly, he was using all his power. The aura of a paragon erupted out from him as the land mass that was the second heaven began to vibrate. It suddenly began to move, as though some giant, invisible hand had grabbed it and was sending it, hurtling toward the barrier protecting the mountain and sea realm. The sight of an entire land mass smashing toward the mountain and sea realm shield was something that provoked shock on the part of both the mountain and sea realm cultivators and the outsiders. Most nervous of all were the outsiders from the second heaven itself. However, they didn't dare to give voice to such feelings and could only watch as the land mass, which had already been smashed by the tempest earlier, suddenly began to crush toward the mountain and sea realm shield. It seemed to be moving slowly, but the truth was that the power it contained was enough to shake heaven and earth. As of this moment, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were now witnessing what a paragon truly was. A paragon was a person who could influence the tide of an entire battle. They could use an entire massive land mass like a weapon to unleash unimaginably destructive power. In fact, were it not for certain limitations, a paragon might even use the starry sky itself in that way. The land mass that was the second heaven was the smallest among the 5 land masses present, but it was still difficult to put into words exactly how large it was. Even the mere pressure exuding from it was enough to shatter the starry sky. Instantly, the mountain and sea realm shield began to show signs of buckling. Xianxia's face was ashen, but he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. At the same time, he produced a medicinal pill bottle. After a moment of hesitation, he popped the contents into his mouth, and then his cultivation base exploded with power. Blue veins popped out on his face, and a vicious-looking green horn suddenly protruded from the top of his head. His skin began to change color, turning green, and he grew to a size of 300 meters tall. His Taoist robe was shredded to pieces as his energy rocketed up. As of this moment, his energy was no longer that of a cultivator but was instead that of a demon. He lifted his right hand and then slapped it down onto the ground, using his life force, using everything he had, to fight against the incoming second heaven land mass. The 100,000 cultivators on the moon all smiled bitterly as they also delivered up their life forces, their cultivation bases, their souls, pouring them into the spell formation to assist Xianxia to assist the mountain and sea realm to fight back against the enemy. As of this moment, the sun and the moon were both in situations of deadly crisis. Moments ago, the mountain and sea realm had held the upper hand, but now it was the opposite. All of that was thanks to Xianfang. Of the 33 heavens, 5 paragons, Xianfang's cultivation base was not the highest. However, in this critical moment in the war, the 33 heavens had sent him, and were clearly intensely confident that under his leadership, the 5 heavens, worth of outsiders, could shake the mountain and sea realm. At the very least, they could easily cause the fighting to last for a year. Back on the sun, Xianfang was laughing. He took a step forward toward Meng Hao, who was still in the spell formation, and said, "There's no harm in revealing my true plan now. My true goal is not Igu or the sun, and not even you. Instead, it is something I haven't spared a glance at this entire time. Your moon." The surrounding cultivators were coughing up blood, and yet none of them abandoned their posts. Just like the cultivators on the moon, they unleashed their cultivation bases and their life forces. Even if they died, they would buy time for Meng Hao. They would bear the brunt of Xianfang's paragon power to help Meng Hao.